Welcome, everyone, to today's Town of Chatham Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. The date is November 18th, 2021. This meeting is being recorded and will be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing on any smartphone or tablet device. If anyone else is recording the meeting, please notify us. The meeting of the ZBA is being conducted remotely in accordance with Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and shall afford adequate alternative means of public access via Microsoft Teams by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410, and then you have to put in the conference ID number, which is 358-674-252, and then hit the pound sign. Or you can join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access, and we will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. In accordance with town policy, the public can speak to any issue/hearing or business item on the agenda during the meeting when recognized by the chair. To begin with, we'll have a roll call of all members authorizing this form of hybrid meeting. I will start with Dave Veach.
I'm David H. Veach, and I vote yes.
Randy Potash, yes.
Dave Thompson, yes.
Paul C. Sample, yes.
Megan Story, yes.
James M. Upson, yes.
And I am David S. Nixon, and I vote yes. I would ask that any citizens and non-board members participating in the call via the phone only that they give us their name and the last four digits of their phone number for identification purposes. The way the meeting will be conducted, to begin with, the hearing notice is read by the lady to my right. This is Sarah B. Clark. She is the PPO for the town. That's a principal permitting officer. She's also the executive secretary for this board as well as the HBDC. Following that, the representative or yourself will present the appeal or the application. When that has finished, I would ask that anyone in favor of the appeal or the application may speak. That could be through Teams or here in the room. Following that, I would read all letters received by the board. When I was done with that, I would ask that anyone who wishes to speak against the appeal application or has a question about it may do so, again, either through the Teams or through the meeting here. And I should say, if you want to be recognized through Teams, you must indicate on the screen so that Sarah can see the little hand that's up so that we can invite you into the meeting. When that has finished, there might be some rebuttal testimony. And then we would ask members of the board if they had any questions and to ask them. When we're done with that, we would close the hearing and go into deliberations. Deliberations are strictly amongst the board unless a member of the board invites someone who has given testimony into the discussion. When the deliberation is done, we would vote. And in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to be successful with zoning boards of appeals, you need to have a super majority. That means in our case, since there are 5 votes, you need to get 4 yes. Smaller towns with 3 members, you need a unanimous vote. I would say that voting today will be Buck, Paul, myself, Dave T. and Dave V. However, Buck has notified us that he must leave the building no later than 5:30 due to another commitment. So if we have not had all the votes by that time, then Randy would take the place of being the 5th voter. To begin with, we have the minutes from our last meeting.
I'll move to approve the minutes as published with one change that I suggested to Sarah, which I think has been taken care of.
Dave Veach seconds.
Okay, we need a roll call on that, Buck.
Buck votes yes.
Paul?
All votes yes.
Dave T?
Ooh, Dave T says yes.
Dave
And
V?
Veach votes yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, despite what the menu says, our first order of business is 21-087.
Application number 21-087, Champlain Road Realty Trust, care of Michael D. Ford Esquire, P.O. Box 485, West Harwich, Mass. 02671. Owner of property located at 275 Champlain Road, also shown on the Town of Chatham's Assessor's Map 12A, Block 12, Lot 2. The applicant seeks to demolish the existing deck and beach access stairs and construct an observation platform and elevated stairway on an unimproved lot as allowed by special permit under footnote 3 of Appendix 2 of the protective bylaw. The lot contains 6.07 acres in an R40 zoning district. A special permit is required under Mass General Law, Chapter 48, Section 9, and Section 8D2B of the Chatham Protective Bylaw.
We received the following letter. It was received today. It's from Michael D. Ford. He writes, on behalf of the applicant, I would request the Board of Appeals continue the public hearing on application number 21-087 for property at 275 Champlain Road to the board's next meeting on December 16th, 2021. In support of this request, the applicants state that the proposed project is still under review by the Conservation Commission, and the applicant will be presenting additional requested information and revised plans to the Conservation Commission at their hearing on December 8th, 2021. It is anticipated this will result in an updated comment from Conservation to the ZBA for the December 16th hearing. Thank you for your consideration. And the only correction I'd make in this, our next meeting happens to be on December 2nd, but outside of that, the letter is correct. Any comments or questions from anybody?
Michael is here if you wish to ask him anything. Here.
Mr. Ford, I believe, is in the audience in case you want to ask him anything. It's pretty straightforward.
He has his hand raised.
Okay, Mr. Ford?
I raised my hand not to offer anything, just to be available, Mr. Chairman, if there was a question.
Okay, thank you very much. It appears there isn't. So, Paul?
Is there time available on December 16th?
Yes, there is.
I'll move to grant the continuance to December 16th of this year.
Dave Veach seconds.
And Sarah, is there a continuance that needs to be signed by the applicant?
Yes, it is received in the file. I just need your signature as well.
Okay, good. All right. Then we'll have a vote. Buck?
Buck votes yes.
Paul?
All votes yes?
Dave?
Dave T. votes yes.
Veach votes yes.
And I vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, Sarah, application 21-078, please.
Application number 21-078, Stephen J. and Lisa S. Knoop, care of William F. Riley, Esquire, P.O. Box 707, Chatham, Mass. 02633, owner of property located at 41 Earls Way, also shown on the Town of Chatham's Assessor's Map 12G 47, or Block 47, Lot M14. The applicant seeks a dimensional variance under Section 8D2C from the requirements of Appendix 2 to allow for an enclosed porch to be located 24 feet from the westerly abutter where a 25-foot setback is required. The lot contains 17,390 square feet, where 60,000 square feet is required in the R60 zoning district. A dimensional variance is required under Mass General Law, Chapter 48, Section 10, and Section 8D2C of the Chatham Protective Bylaw. This was continued from October 14th, 2021.
Good afternoon, Bill Riley on behalf of Lisa Knoop. Unfortunately, Stephen Knoop has passed away. So this is a situation that's confusing to say the least. So the original house, the house that's there on the property, was built in 1986. And a deck was added to it at that time. The deck that's there today was added to it at that time. And so after Steve and Lisa purchased the property in 2015, they decided they'd like to enclose the porch. Unfortunately, so Steve's not available to discuss the process, but they had a plan created by a local surveyor that showed the deck complying with the sideline setback. Now, I sent in your packet, the back two sheets are site plans. They were prepared by Dan Speakman. The very back page was the as-built plot plan when the foundation was put in. And so, as you can see, they show the foundation being 37 feet from the street line. Then when they, and it shows 38 feet to the rear property line. So if you have 38 feet, you subtract 12, which is the width of the deck, then you have 26 feet. So they're in compliance. However, if you look at the plot plan that was submitted when they requested the special permit, the building is 38 feet from the street. And I think what happened was when you add cladding to the foundation of the building and then add cladding to the enclosed porch, now you're short by a foot on the setback to the rear property line. And so Dan Beacott, who was I guess he did the presentation in 2016, is here today. And what he recounted to me, and he'll be happy to answer questions from you folks, is that originally they intended to remove the existing deck and build a new deck. And then when they started working on it, they had discovered that the framing timbers were in great shape, it wasn't that old, and they decided to just build on top of the old one without realizing that the old one was in violation of the sideline setback as well. So it was built. And then in 2020, an as-built plan was requested by the town. Which is the next sheet working from the back. So this is the December 17th, 2020 plot plan. And that shows the distance to the rear property line as being 24 feet. So at that time, Jay Briggs, who's present here today, said that a variance was necessary. He was under the belief that it was a brand-new deck, and a variance was required. In any event, so we filed a request for a variance, which is what's before you today. A variance is something that you can grant if you can find circumstances that, owing to the circumstances, I'm going to read from the statute, owing to the circumstances relating to the soil conditions, shape, or topography of such land or structures, especially affecting such land, but not generally affecting the zoning district in which it is located, and a literal enforcement would involve substantial hardship, financial or otherwise, and desirable relief can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without nullifying or substantially derogating from the purpose and intent of the bylaw. So what we have, we included a copy of the subdivision plan, which is right behind my analysis. And Lot 14 is our lot. And you can see, as it showed on the site plans also submitted, that there's a bend in the back property line. Apparently, when the deck was built, people weren't aware of that. And so it's not much, but I think you could find that it's a circumstance that affects this property without affecting the property generally in the zone. So is that a substantial hardship? Well, that's within your discretion. What I would say is that it is a hardship, and it's a very minor issue under the zoning bylaw, because clearly, at least I believe it's clear, that relief could be granted without any public detriment, certainly no harm to the public here. And you're not substantially derogating from the purpose and intent of the bylaw. If you've been to the site, as I'm sure you all have, it's very heavily vegetated. In fact, you don't even know where the property line is when you're on the site, because Steve and Lisa planted a whole series of arborvitaes there along the back line. And so there's sort of a wooded section between the Canoe property and the two lots behind it. In addition, the Canoe property is lower than the properties behind it, so that the enclosure of the deck does no harm, there's no detriment to the adjoining properties. So I think that where the deck has actually been there since 1986, and the enclosure's been there since 2016, you could find that a variance in this instance is a very minor matter, zoning-wise, although it's a substantial matter when it comes to attempting to correct it. I mean, the cost associated with such correction would be substantial. So we would ask for your consideration in that regard. As I say, Dan Beacott is here if you have any questions for him, since he did the actual construction work and actually made the presentation to you at the last meeting. So that would be our presentation.
I'd ask that anybody in the audience, either here or on Teams, who wishes to speak in favor of this application, to please indicate that they would like to speak.
There is no one that wishes to speak in favor of this application.
Then I'll read the correspondence. First, we have a memo. This is from Judith Giorgio. She's a health agent for the town of Chatham. She writes on 10/13, I have reviewed the proposed enclosed porch for this property. The new porch will not encroach on the existing septic system, nor will it add sewage flow to the property. I have no concerns. Then we have a letter from Jay Briggs. He's the building commissioner for the town of Chatham. He writes on October 6th, I have reviewed the ZBA application, including the recorded special permit appeal number 16-071, August 23rd, 2016, quote, as-built plot plan by Dan Speakman, professional land surveyor, and December 17th, 2020, as-built plot plan by Dan A. Speakman, professional land surveyor. It is evident the proposed enclosed porch was designed in a tapered manner to achieve compliance with the required abutters setback. The approved plans were not adhered to during the construction, resulting in a 24.0-foot abutters setback as shown on the most recent as-built plan. This issue can only be resolved by the grant of a variance or by requiring the homeowner to modify the construction of the enclosed porch to comply with the required 25-foot abutters setback. Then we have an email. This is dated October 14th. It's from Andrew Grover. His address is 84 Earls Way. He writes, I have reviewed the plans and related documents for the above related project, and I am in favor for the approval of this project. That's the extent of the correspondence. I would now ask for anyone here in the audience or in Microsoft Teams who wishes to speak either against this or has a specific question to please indicate so that Sarah can interject you into the meeting.
I see no one that wishes to speak in opposition or has a specific question.
Okay, then we'll have questions from the board. Dave Veach.
I think I understand what happened, but I think I'll just. Your microphone. I feel pretty clear I understand what happened, but I think I will just ask the builder who, the 2016,
Dan?
Yeah.
Oh, come over here.
uh,
Okay, speak into the microphone. Tell them, give them your name first.
Okay, hi, I'm Dan Beacott.
hi, Dan.
And you can take off your mask if you
Oh, okay.
wish.
That'd be great.
So I guess I mean, when I looked at this, I'm, wow, this one. So the existing deck, it was already there.
Yes.
And you just worked up from that.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Essentially, we did put new footings underneath it and a new beam to support the new
Yeah.
weight
but-
of the
so
porch, but yeah,
Brought that up to code or whatever and then
Yes.
built up from there.
that's correct.
I mean, so I guess I would ask you to speculate a little bit, but the plan, the as-built plan from 2016 that shows the corner being 25 feet from the sideline, and it's dimensioned there at 23 feet to the point of the deck and 12 feet back on the. Was this plan part of what you saw in doing the construction, or
Yeah, this is the original from 2016?
Yes,
this is a surveyor's plan? I think this was probably done
that's here.
Oh,
prior.
gotcha. Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, as a builder, I'm no surveyor, but I certainly, reviewed it and said, okay, 25 feet if we stick to that existing corner, so let's get to work. And we got there and we found that the existing deck, other than the supports underneath it that needed to be upgraded and brought to code, I found all the rest of the joists and the decking, everything to be fine. And I figured if it's good where it is, then
Yeah.
let's get to work.
So essentially, the deck that was there didn't comply to this drawing.
Right.
And I'm not surprised that it didn't, because when you look at the other end of the deck, it's dimensioned as 12 feet off of the building. And they don't specifically call out the 11 feet on the other end. But
Right.
that's
Yeah.
would you agree that that would be very unusual to build a structure to match those dimensions?
Absolutely. Yeah. It would have been ludicrous.
Probably twice as expensive anyway, or more, and hardly worth so putting words in your mouth, I mean, had you caught that 11-foot dimension, you probably would have made it 11 feet on the other end, so it was
Agreed.
consistently the same.
Absolutely.
And we
Yeah.
wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I have, Dave. Thank you. Thanks.
You're
Randy.
welcome.
So Attorney Riley, I apologize if you've already explained this. I might have zoned out.
Can you speak into the microphone,
No,
please,
no
Randy?
pun intended, zoning. But in your application back in 2016, it says that they were going to demolish the deck, and then they didn't end up doing that. Why is that? If you could just,
I would say, in general, just because when we arrived at the job to begin work, and in noticing that the existing structure was in very good shape, it just made sense economically and labor-wise to just do what we needed to do with the footings and the beams underneath it and just save ourselves the money and the aggravation from removing all the existing material, which was to code. And, you know, we didn't have to throw it away and pay for all of that expense and everything too, so, I mean, I didn't see any point in demolishing something that was perfectly fine to continue building on top of.
So you advised the homeowners what you just said to me?
Yes.
And then they said, okay, fine?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Dave Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions of Mr. Riley.
Paul.
I think my questions have been asked by Randy and Dave, so I have no further questions.
Megan.
I have no additional questions.
Buck.
So I see that in the letter that we got when the permit was approved and sent to the Coops, if that's the correct pronunciation, close.
Sure.
It was in September of 2016, and in that letter, it said that you were the presenter for the application for the special permit.
Yes.
And in that application or in that hearing, you were using the print that was dated, I think it was August 2016, August 23rd, 2016?
Yep. August 23rd.
August
2016,
23rd,
yep.
correct. And that, in that one there, it showed that the corner of the new enclosure was going to be 23 feet from the back of, I'll call it the L. I don't know what the correct term is.
Sure.
And I would say it appears that it's fairly obvious that there is a taper there. So you were aware that it was not a perfect square with 4 90-degree corners.
To that point, I would say, you know, this is a photocopy and kind of blown up. I did look at the original, and my most concerning factor was how far we were off that back lot. It was 25 feet. And so I was more concerned with that. And I saw the 12 feet there on the back end. And I mean, I agree, it just missed my mind that 12 from 23 is 11. On the print, when I looked at it, you know, I didn't eyeball it and say, okay, that looks like a foot out. I mean, oftentimes those pencil lines that are drawn, you know, can look a little squirrely. And I mean, I always go by the numbers more than that. And, you know, I agree, I should have done simple math right there and realized that it was 11 feet on that corner and 12 on the other. But to his point, that would have been asinine to build such a structure. So if we had caught that in the first place, then we would have obviously done 11 feet on the other side. But like I said, I was more concerned about that 25-foot setback, and I knew I wanted to build a 12-foot deck on top of the existing, you know, in the existing footprint. So that's when I made the decision that when we got to the job, hey, it's a 12-foot deck, it's in fine shape, let's save what we can of it. Not realizing that the original structure was drawn out of square. You know what I mean?
So you're saying that the print we have, this 8.5 by 13, is not the size of the print that was approved at the hearing?
Yeah, no, when I saw the first print, it was much larger and not this blown up. And so it didn't look like it was tapered. Even when I look at this piece of paper, I mean, now that you mention it and you really want to study it, it looks a little tapered, but a foot in a smaller scale is not something that just picked off of my eye. But again, I agree, I should have just went by the numbers and realized that they didn't add up to 12 foot there. But again, I was under the assumption the original deck was the footprint we were going to be using. And so again, I was more concerned with that 25 foot off the lot line than I was about the other numbers.
So this plan was, or this blueprint that Mr. Speakman did was dated 2016, and we're seeing the as-built print being dated recently, last year.
Yep.
When did the construction take place?
In 2016, right after we got the permit, we began the job and worked through that winter on the job to complete it then.
Wonderful. On the print dated August 23rd, 2016, in large letters, it says "as built." That was confusing to me. If you're submitting a blueprint for an application,
Yep,
there shouldn't be an as-built, there
Right.
should be a proposed.
I agree.
I don't think you can hold that against Dan, though.
Oh, I'm not holding
Right.
anything against anybody. I'm just looking at all the facts,
Right.
and they're asking me to decide what are we gonna do, and I see a lot of confusion.
Right. In the essence of time, we chose to use Dan as the surveyor because he was the original surveyor with a lot of that neighborhood. So I thought it would be, like I said, in the essence of time to be able to get the proper drawings and documents ready. That's why I used him, and I don't think he realized that it was still the as-built as well, too. I don't know.
The reason I asked that was because it appeared that maybe the as-built was just done now. I thought maybe you had just done the construction
Right.
recently.
Right.
And that would explain no surveyor stakes. But if
Right.
you went and started construction shortly after the
Yes.
surveyor, wouldn't there have been stakes on the property?
I'll bet there
To,
were.
to my knowledge, in that back corner, no. And again, it was an existing footprint of a deck, so I wasn't really concerned about our new construction encroaching upon something getting too close. I knew I had my footprint there already, and I have been in circumstances when it's not that way, when you're actually adding to the property towards that lot line that's close, then you have some stakes there, you can run some strings, and you can check yourself as you go along, because you certainly don't want to end up in trouble when you're this far along in the construction. But in this case, again, it was an existing footprint that I felt pretty good about us starting right here and going straight up, you know?
I got it. Not in this packet, but in the town records, there are some construction prints that were drawn up by somebody. They're not signed or, did you provide?
I believe the construction drawings are done by me, yes.
Okay. And they were about 6 pages showing right elevation, left
Yep.
elevation.
Sounds about right.
There was no dimensions on those sketches at all. That's a little unusual, maybe
I would say that is
maybe
unusual.
highly unusual.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I haven't looked at them since 2016, so I don't know. I'll take your word for it. I've gotten better throughout the years, I guess, is what I'm saying.
So as a carpenter or a contractor, or builder, whatever the moniker is, you got this as-built print that probably should have been proposed, but we won't
Yep,
get hung up on that. You drew 6 sketches with no dimensions at all, and you didn't reference this print at all. You just assumed when you drew it up that you had it in your head it was 12 by 36 rectangle.
right. Yeah, I mean, I never try to make the assumptions. Usually somebody will catch me on that, hey, you never draw in how big this is, you know, and I've made some corrections to plans as you go along, so I guess, like I said, I haven't seen them in a while, so I can't say too much on that, but, you know, it would have been my error for sure if I didn't have the dimensions on them.
No further questions. Thank you, Mr.
I'll move to close the hearing and move into deliberations.
Dave Veach seconds.
That takes a vote. Buck,
Buck votes yes.
Paul,
All votes yes.
Dave?
Dave votes yes.
Veach votes yes.
And I vote yes. Deliberations. We'll start with Randy.
Okay. So, Mr. Riley, you've told us that there's an issue with the bend in the lot, and you're an officer of the court, so I think that, given that, and that it's a modest dimensional variance, and that the courts are much more lenient with those, and that we don't have any issues that we know of by any neighbors, and this lot, the lot has had this problem for well over 20 years, and we all, lawyers at least know that that's a meaningful time for nobody to have objected. So I think that if I were voting, I would say that there's definitely a financial hardship as well to and it's a beautiful deck, and it would be a shame to have to tear it down. So it certainly is not a substantial issue for the neighborhood that I can see, so I'd probably support it.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. I see no problem with this bill. It's human error as far as I'm concerned.
Paul?
I think what Randy indicated is probably the appropriate approach to this situation. Perhaps it should remind us that we shouldn't be accepting plot plans that indicate they're as-built when it hasn't been built yet, and it's partly our fault. But in any case, I agree with her approach.
Megan?
I would completely agree with Randy. I think that this is just a sort of a myriad of errors, but none that were egregious and none that were intentional.
Bob?
Well, unfortunately, I have to say what I think. And I feel terrible about it because I went over there again this afternoon and looked at it for the third time. And I know it'll be a major hardship, but I think if I can count the score on the deliberations coming to me, there's probably 4 yes votes, maybe not. I don't feel comfortable with it. I don't think it meets the threshold of the requirements for a variance. There's too many corners cut. I'm not comfortable with that. You have a blueprint. There's only 3 dimensions. I don't think you build to the setbacks. I think you build to the 12, the 36, and the 3 dimensions that are on the blueprint of the structure you're building, not the setbacks. The fact that was no stakes there bothers me a little bit, but I have to vote what I think. In the back of my mind, there's this saying that it's often easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. And that has been ringing in my head since I've seen this. So I can't support it.
Dave Veach?
Well, when I looked at this plan drawn as shown as built from 2016, and I looked at that before I went out there. And immediately, when I did the math, and this is without an understanding there was a deck in existence there already. But based on this plan, as a carpenter, builder, there was the mistake. The mistake was made drawing a tapered building in order to meet that setback requirement. Because and then it wasn't well dimensioned in that, also in that regard. So put this, even absent a deck to work from, I would not hold a builder responsible for catching that error. That error was, as far as I'm concerned, most likely was made by the engineer. And if it was an error, and I shouldn't really say it would be that drawing something this way really doesn't follow its standard building practice. I mean, if the constraint there was that it could only be 11 feet off the corner of the building in order to meet that sideline setback, then in my mind at least, the only reasonable thing to do would be that you draw the entire thing at 11 feet so that it's parallel to the existing building. Because otherwise, every piece of wood in that structure has to be cut individually. And it just doesn't make sense. Whatever extra foot you gain on the northeast end of this is not worth it. It's not worth it at all. So this was an error that was made. It certainly, and that error to me is enough that I find that it meets all of the criteria. It certainly would be a hardship to the owners to have to correct this somehow at this point, and I don't think the town or anyone benefits from that. So I will absolutely support this.
To me, it's very difficult because I don't think with the testimony that we've heard that the proper protocol was followed. I just don't think so. You know, they just sort of did it. And yet, what Dave Veach says is very true. The hardship to the current owners, who had nothing to do with it, is substantial. I wish there was some way to exonerate them, but yet hold the contractor responsible. But Dave has a good point. Maybe the real responsibility was whoever drew up the house to begin with, or the engineer. Yeah. So. Very reluctantly, I will vote yes.
I'll move to grant the petition as submitted.
Dave Veach seconds.
We need a vote on this, Buck?
Yeah, Buck votes yes.
Paul votes yes.
I vote yes.
Dave Thompson votes yes.
And Dave Veach votes yes.
That's a unanimous decision, Mr. Riley.
Thank you.
Application number 21-070, George E. Foote Trust, care of William G. Litchfield Esquire, 330 Orleans Road, North Chatham, Mass. 02650. Owner of property located at 85 Cockle Drive, also shown on the Town of Chatham's Assessor's Map 5D, Block 1, Lot SMI 15. The applicant seeks to enlarge, extend, or change a nonconforming dwelling on a non-conforming lot via the demolition of the existing dwelling and the construction of a new dwelling. The existing dwelling is non-conforming in that it is located partially within the floodplain, elevation 11, and within the 50-foot setback to the Coastal Conservancy District. The proposed dwelling will be non-conforming in that it will be located within the 50-foot setback to the Coastal Conservancy District. The existing building coverage is 1,099 square feet, 16.1%, and the proposed building coverage is 1,481 square feet, 21.7%, where 15% is the maximum allowed. The lot is nonconforming in that it contains 6,838 square feet of buildable upland and 11,729 square feet, where 20,000 square feet is required in the R20 zoning district. A special permit is required under Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 6, and Section 5B of the Chatham Protective Bylaw. This was continued from September 23rd and October 28th, 2021.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Bill Litchfield here on behalf of George and Susan Foote, who I believe are with us electronically. With me today is David Little of Ryder and Wilcox. David's firm does correct site plans without any errors, so they may be available for other projects in the future. David is here because of the fact that, as Sarah read in the hearing notice, the matter was continued a couple of times so the Conservation could review it. David handled Conservation's consideration of this matter along with Teresa Sprague of Blue Flags, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. But David can speak to some of the questions that you may have about the natural environment criteria, which is one that you have in front of you. The Footes purchased this property in 1989. Mr. Semple can appreciate that Mr. Foote was a young lawyer in 1989, and he's now retiring. So he and Mrs. Foote are looking forward to living in this house, not necessarily on a year-round basis, but on a more year-round basis. They are not here today, primarily because they're at their other home off Cape, but even though it's fairly warm today, the house is not exactly well insulated. You saw the house, and there are reasons not to spend a lot of time in the winter. So what they would like to do after it having served them well for 33 years or so is to replace it with a new but still appropriate house. Sarah can bring up, there's the site plan, and there's the view of the house. It is a 1 3/4 story. The bottom view is what the wildlife will see from that part of the Cockle Cove Marsh, and the top is what you will see from Cockle Drive. I've always thought that the Board of Appeals had members had a special advantage, and I've spoken to this before, because if you're playing a trivia game and asked to name a one-way street in Chatham, you might have some trouble. But having been down Cockle Drive, you know that aside from Hallett Lane, we have at least one other one-way street in Chatham. The top view is what you would see from Cockle Drive when you go down and come back up around, and those are the two side views, a fairly simple 1 3/4 story salt box with a dormer on the north side, which is the Cockle Drive side. It is obviously a challenging site, and if Sarah could bring us to the site plan, you know why. The 50-foot setback from the top of the coastal bank encompasses almost the entire lot. There is an edge of bank on the right-hand side, the edge of the bank of the actual wetland, but the further one in is the existing house sits to the wetland side of it. So we are proposing, when we demolish the house with your approval of a special permit, to elevate it and move it back out of the flood zone. And that's sort of a segue into the criteria, the first of which is adequacy of site, including building coverage and setbacks. Like all but one lot in the neighborhood, we have an undersized lot, a small footprint covering 16.1% of the buildable upland, but only 9.4% of the entire lot. The house itself, as indicated and is shown there, is currently in red, is currently within the Conservancy District setback and is sitting in the AE flood zone. I think you can find the site to be adequate for the new home, which reduces the proximity to the top of the edge of the bank at the wetland. And the house itself is removed completely from the floodplain. The top of foundation is at 16.2 feet, which is 5 feet above the flood elevation in this location. Total lot coverage, or coverage of the total lot, is 12.6%. As to compatibility of size, I handed out on the third sheet of the stapled papers some comparisons. The neighborhood was developed with small summer cottages, several of which, as you saw from having been out there, have been rebuilt or expanded since about the original development in the 1950s. The new home, if you approve it, will remain compatible with its surroundings. It's consistent as to gross floor area and living area, especially with those which now have second stories. The footprint remains compatible at 1,481 square feet, and the first floor living area is less than 1,300 square feet. As to the extent of increase in nonconformity, the nonconformities were, as noted by Sarah. Coverage increases by 382 square feet, but again, it's relocated out of the floodplain, so we're increasing somewhat one nonconformity, but doing our best to eliminate another. As to suitability of site, the site has been developed since the house was built in 1960. We've had a very thorough review by the Conservation Commission, which is why we had to ask you for the extensions. Teresa could not be here, but on her behalf, I would explain, and David can comment further, that there is significant mitigation planting, some 3,600 square feet of mitigation, involving replacement of lawn, addition of 80 native shrubs and 12 trees, a lot of native grasses and wildflowers. And I believe the Conservation has not only closed the hearing, but did they write the order yesterday? Or they're in the process?
They're in the process.
Mr. Little reports that they're in the process, but I believe there is a letter that Sarah or the chair will read indicating that that is the case. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As to scale sighting, mass, views, and vistas, the existing house speaks for itself, perhaps not eloquently, and it might be time to replace it. What is proposed, as shown on the site, on the elevations which you've seen, is a traditional salt box, fortunately not a gambrel. It, I think, is an attractive and thoughtful design by right on Wilcox by Bernadette McLeod, and I think will be an improvement on the streetscape that is there now. And of course, we also didn't want to go too high to block views from up above, so we were cognizant of that. As the compatibility of use, it will remain residential. There's no change, although it be designed for eventual retirement and more year-round use. As the adequacy of water and sewage, we have town water and on-site functioning and up-to-date Title V two-bedroom septic system. There's no change in that regard. And as you can see on the site plan, the septic system is located as far away from the marsh as is possible. Mr. Chairman, would you like me to ask David to comment on the conservation aspects at this point? Mr. Little, if you would be so kind.
Good afternoon, David Little. We did go through a couple of hearings, the result of which is the plan that Bill passed out today with his packet from Teresa Sprague of Blue Flax Design, which shows a significant restoration of the property between the marsh and the existing dwelling. We really had no opportunity to locate the dwelling and the addition in any other place than we show on the plan, simply because we're maintaining the setback to the street. The septic system requires certain setbacks to the foundation. And then we did have the opportunity to come in a southerly direction because of the R20 zone and the 15-foot setback requirement. So even though we were coming into the hill and removing trees on the south and southwest portion of the property, Teresa Sprague's restoration plan provided several new trees, and where I am showing the 3 terraced walls on the southwest side, what that does, it allows for the house to be built with normal frame walls in a level area rather than to be built into a hill, which would have required a concrete wall which would extend up above the first floor. So those terraced areas are proposed to be planted with native plants and shrubs as well. And then finally, I believe in the note from the Conservation Commission, one addition that I made to our site plan was we provided a stone drainage trench on the easterly side of the parking area on Cockle Drive. One of the Conservation Commission members wanted to see the paved parking area changed to gravel. So I went out to the site late last Friday when it was raining just to observe what was happening with the stormwater, and whether it was a gravel drive or not, I think because of the slope, there still would have been stormwater that would be washing onto the site from Cockle Drive. So I proposed a 2-foot wide by 3-foot deep infiltration trench along that easterly side of the driveway, which will properly infiltrate the stormwater runoff. So that's the only change, significant change that was made to my plan. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, David. The other criteria are not really at issue, but as you know, what is at issue is whether replacing the current structure with a new and reasonably expanded home and moving the house completely out of the floodplain, elevating it 5 feet above flood elevation, is substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, and I think that you can find that it is not substantially more detrimental. The new house will be shifted back back from and elevated out of the flood zone. As David has indicated, there's extensive mitigation planting, dry well and drainage trench for stormwater runoff, with significant improvements to the wildlife habitat adjacent to the marsh. It admittedly, as David said, it's a challenging lot given the steep hillside terrain as well as the floodplain, but the retaining walls will be heavily vegetated and thus allow rainwater to infiltrate rather than run off. I think the design is sensitive to the location. There are a couple of comment or question letters from abutters. They're not opposed to it. Sarah, I think, correctly characterized them as having questions, And after those are read, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to try to respond to some of those questions. That is our presentation. We thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience, either here or on Microsoft Teams, that wishes to speak in favor of this application? If so, please indicate now.
There is no one in the audience that wishes to speak in favor of this application.
Then I will read the correspondence. First, we have a note from Nicole Smith. She's the conservation agent for the town of Chatham. She writes on November 18th, 85 Cockle Drive was approved yesterday. A draft order of conditions will be voted on December 1st. The approved plan varies very slightly from the ZBA plan, as they have added a stone drainage trench. Then we have a memo. This is from Judith Giorgio, health agent for the town. She writes on 9/21, I have reviewed the plan to demo and rebuild the dwelling. The proposal does not appear to add septic flow to the existing system. The existing and proposed dwellings are both 2 bedrooms. A portion of the dwelling is to be constructed on sonotubes to meet Title V setback requirements. Then we have an email. This is from Roger, and his last name was Nail. And he writes, Sarah, we have no objection. Then we have a letter from Louise Wasley. She's at 97 Cockle Drive. She writes on October 23rd. I'm writing in concern of the construction and mitigation plans. I am a neighbor living at 97 Cockle Drive, so the plans affect the woods between our 2 homes. The plans call for removal of approximately 20 mature trees and the construction of a tiered wall in the bank of the woods. This is very disconcerting. The woods slope steeply both to the north and to the east. My question is, where will the water run off during significant rainstorms, 2 of which we have had very recently? Will it flow over the wall, or will it flow down the slopes along the sides of the wall into 1, our side yard, and 2, into the marsh? The water flow into our side yard, would that flow into the leaching field of the existing septic system of 85 Cockle Drive? These are all questions. The newly planted shrubs and trees will not be able to absorb the water for many years. From the plans and the stakings of the yard, the wall is not too far from our property line. Are there any restrictions on the wall, the location of a wall that is that close to the line? Recently, the Cockle Cove Marsh system has been in the news media. There is a YouTube video describing the system. There also is an article in the CCF Bulletin by Jerry Stahl, quote unquote, the wonder of Chatham's salt marshes. He states, quote, the Cockle Cove area is projected to undergo significant environmental change in the next 2 decades, with sea level rise and surge from increasingly harsh storms flooding the marshes, beach, many roads and homes. Unless the marshes can grow and migrate in response to these changes, we want to ensure that there are areas for the marsh to migrate landward as sea level continues to rise. And therefore, we try to acquire and protect adjacent property, end of quote. I urge the board to see the video and read the article.
Thank you.
Lastly, Cockle Drive is a private road. My husband is head of the Cockle Cove Meadows Association. We hope that any damage to the roadway during construction is paid for by the owner's budget and not from the association's savings. Thank you for your attention. I trust the ZBA and the Chatham Conservation Commission will keep the marsh ecosystem in mind as this project moves forward. Please let me know you received this email. Also, I understand the hearing has been postponed until November. Then we have a letter. This is from Alexander Driscoll. It's written and was received on October 23rd. Thank you for the opportunity to make comments on this project. The salt marsh to the east of the dwelling is known for historic flooding, and scientific predictions are of a 3-foot sea level rise within the next 3 decades. The dwelling sits entirely on the floodplain and within the AE FEMA designation. The FEMA flood designations are backward looking. Thus, if this project is to occur, there needs to be as much forward-looking protection as possible. The new build should raise the house at least 3 feet to put it above the expected sea level rise of 3 feet within 3 decades. Of course, a breakthrough at Cockle Cove Beach would cause that rise to be even higher, as the protected salt marsh would be inundated by open ocean immediately. The dune line at the parking lot grows thinner. It is scientific knowledge that salt marshes continually migrate inland, thus affecting the Foot property in the future. Salt marshes are protected by mass law, and there is question about this project being allowed in the Act. In addition, the taking down of up to 20 trees takes away the anchoring of the soil around the house from erosion. The roots hold the soil and keep it from dispersing into the protected marsh and into the waterway. Planting bushes will not give the protection of mature trees. A wall to the west does not accomplish this. Lastly, although an existing Title V system is in place, an IT system would better protect the salt marsh from nitrogen loading, especially with projected sea level rise. That's the extent of the correspondence. I would ask for anybody in the audience or on Microsoft Teams who wishes to speak either against this application or has a specific question to please indicate to us now so that you can be recognized.
There is no one in the audience that has a specific question or wishes to speak in objection.
Mr. Litchfield, the last 2 letters I read raise a lot of questions, so would you care to address them?
They do indeed, Mr. Chairman, and maybe I could start with the Driscoll questions, and then Mr. Little can speak to some of those, and Ms. Walsley's question. As to the comments or questions the Driscolls raised, we absolutely understand and agree that we need to be forward-looking, which is why we are moving the house out of the floodplain. The Driscoll letter commented or suggested that the house be elevated 3 feet, and in fact, we're elevating it 5 feet for that very reason. Pardon me, the 3,600 square feet mitigation, some 3,000 square feet of that is in the area adjacent to the marsh, and it will accommodate any eventual migration of the marsh. We fully understand that and agree with it. So the vegetation will provide entree for the marsh to move onto what is now lawn, if that is the case. The number of trees, yes, a number of trees are being removed, but we are also planting nearly as many, and again, some 80 bushes. The Blue Flax mitigation proposal speaks to them. As to an IA system, would be beneficial and would be required for a 3rd bedroom. The Foots are at a stage in life where they welcome their children and grandchildren, but in limited doses, so at this point, they are not looking for a 3rd bedroom. If that ever was in the future, an IA system would be an opportunity. As to the letter from Ms. Walsley, when I became aware of it, I brought it to the attention of George and Susan, and in fact, they were in contact with her today and passed along some of the comments that Teresa Sprague made in regard to those questions, and if I could read it briefly, Teresa's comment. We are planting an enormous area relative to the proposed increase in the structure, including 3,600 square feet of existing lawn on the coastal bank to the edge of the salt marsh. We are planting 80 shrubs, 12 trees, and restoring the ground cover layer with deep-rooted native grasses and wildflowers. All of this planting will not only improve wildlife habitat value, but will also protect soils from erosion by slowing water down and allowing it to infiltrate versus running over or off of the slope into the salt marsh. The root systems of these particular shrubs filter any pollutants from the stormwater, improving the water quality of the marsh. The proposed retaining walls to the south of the house will also be heavily vegetated, allowing rainwater to run off properly. David can speak to some of the technicalities of the elevations, but given my limited knowledge, water generally doesn't run uphill, but David can give a better answer on that.
Mr. Chairman, could I just give you one sheet to pass around to help with my explanation?
And while he does that, one more comment. The Foots have indicated to the Wasleys, and they'll indicate to you, or I will on their behalf, that they and their contractor will restore any construction damage to the road. They are longtime residents there, and they are absolutely willing to do that. So if the board felt that was a requirement or a condition over and above my assurance, it's one with which we could live.
So the 8.5 by 11 sheet that's being passed around right now shows a section through the southwest corner of the property where we have designed these retaining walls. First off, I'd like to say that several of the trees that are being removed should be removed now anyway for safety reasons. They're very, very close to the house, and I think it's smart to remove them anyway. But with respect to the walls that are shown on that plan, in between each wall, it's going to be well vegetated, so it will actually slow down any stormwater runoff that would be coming from a higher area going toward the marsh and should infiltrate it much better. Thank you very much.
And finally, as you're aware, walls of 3 feet or less are not required to meet a setback.
Thank you. So, questions from the board. We'll start with Mr. Thompson.
I am not going to ask any questions at this time. Oh, thank you. I'm not going to ask any questions at this time, Mr. Nixon.
Paul?
I think my questions have been answered by the presentation.
Megan?
Likewise.
Buck?
So David, I heard the neighbors' letters count out 20 trees, and I didn't hear in the rebuttal to that if the 20 was accurate, or is it known the number of trees that are being cut down?
It's approximately 20 trees, but they vary in size from one 18-inch pine, which is located right at the corner of the existing dwelling, to what I would call saplings of this size. And the land management plan that's been prepared by Teresa Sprague is promoting almost as many trees and complementing that with a significant number of shrubs. And the trees she's proposing, it's my understanding that they will provide better wildlife habitat than the trees that are presently on the site.
The replacement trees are 1 for 1 then?
No, I think that was one of the concerns the commission had, but the site really didn't lend itself to replacement trees of 1 to 1, and so she compensated that with a significant larger number of woody shrubs.
And when we talk about replacement of trees, 1 for 1 or something more or something less, when I was at the site, some of those trees looked 20, 25, 30 feet tall, but I wasn't sure which ones were coming down and which ones weren't. But when you do a replacement tree and you're taking down a 20-foot tree, what's the height of the replacement tree?
Oh, it's much smaller. But one thing I've learned that through osmosis, working with people like Blue Flax Design, is if you plant a smaller tree, let's say if you plant a 4 to 5 foot tree next to a 8 to 10 foot tree, the 4 to 5 foot tree acclimates to the property more quickly, the survivability rate is better, and in a certain period of time, that 4 to 5 foot tree is already caught up to the larger tree. So they are smaller in size, but over time, they will provide significant habitat for the site.
And I noticed that, that it was referenced several times, habitat for the wildlife. But one of the other benefits of trees that wasn't discussed was canopy and shade covering, as opposed to being out in the middle of a field. And that can't be replaced with the replacement trees that are smaller. I mean, they will grow faster and they will catch up, but since the 1-for-1 isn't, even if you just count tree, 20-foot tree coming down and an 8-foot one that maybe in 4 or 5 years will be at 10 feet, there's a significant loss. And the mitigation, well, 3,600, 3,800 is a substantial improvement over, we'll say, bluegrass and fescue. The canopy isn't replaced, and I have concerned about it.
It's not replaced, Mr. Upson, but I don't know if you noticed during the onsite, the so-called canopy, a lot of it is just lollipops from the pines that are out there. There's a lot more to different type of trees that can grow up and create a more robust canopy over time than the canopy you get from tall pitch pines that don't have any lower branches and they just have a lollipop at the top, which is the case with a lot of the canopy out there right now.
Thank you.
I have no questions, Tim.
Randy?
I have no question.
My question has to do with Mrs. Wasley's letter when she was talking about the salt marsh. How is the construction affecting the salt marsh? Or isn't it?
Well, I don't think the construction is affecting the salt marsh. I think the robust planting plan will address her concerns about aiding the salt marsh to move landward with sea level rise. But I don't see how the construction of the house is harming the salt marsh.
And there would be normal precautions, hay bales or whatever else, a limit of work to prevent construction runoff.
Okay, thank you.
I'll move to close the hearing and move into deliberations.
Dave Veach seconds.
We need a vote on that, Buck?
Buck votes yes.
Paul?
All votes yes?
Dave T.
JT?
votes yes.
Dave
JV?
Veach votes yes.
And I vote yes. Paul? Deliberations.
Well, I think the mitigation that's taking place from the conservation viewpoint and the control of the site answers my questions in terms of concerns that the neighbors had. And I think other than that, there's a lot of pluses to this with the moving of the house back. So I think it meets our standard of not being substantially more detrimental to the property.
Megan?
I agree with Paul in that all of my questions have been answered, and I appreciate the modest nature and keeping it 2 bedrooms.
So the primary concern on this application would be the effect on the environment, and Conservation has weighed in on it, and they've made some positive suggestions. Is it perfect? Maybe yes, maybe no, but doing the best of all possible, I will support it.
Dave?
Yeah, I agree with all the previous. I mean, Conscom has passed on this in ways that I think are fine. And, in our role, also thinking about one of the letters at least talking about projected sea level rise and things. I mean, these are things that we may be facing in the future, but, we're here to interpret and be bound by laws that are on the books now. And it's in terms of, dealing with projected things like sea level rise, well, then the obligation is to change the laws, and then we interpret the changed laws in that regard. But it's not really up to us to be, I think, asking someone to go to greater extent than what the law asks of them because of anticipated sea level rise. I just think that's what we should be doing sitting here. Anyway, I will certainly approve this project. So.
Randy?
I think it blends right in with the neighborhood, and conservation has done its job, and I would support it by voting.
I'm fully in favor of this. It's an improvement for the neighborhood. It's improving the marsh area. It's a win-win.
Paul, do we need conditions?
Well, I would think, given the congested nature of the one-way street there, I would be inclined to impose our standard conditions, which would be all construction activity would be contained on-site and construction vehicles contained on-site or off-site with the permission of the property owner. That between June 30th and Labor Day, there would be no exterior construction would be allowed. No work shall be permitted on the weekends, and construction activity between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. only.
And Mr. Litchfield offered a condition regarding the, if there should be any damage to the road.
Yes, we can add the condition that if there was damage to the road as a result of the activities by the applicants, then they would be responsible for repairing it. That condition would be added.
Okay.
So I'll move approval on that basis.
And I second.
Okay, we need a vote on this. Buck?
Buck votes yes, but I have a question on, or it's not a question, just a comment. When they have to restore the road to the original condition, that's kind of, I don't know if we want to say wishy-washy, but the person writing the check might have a different opinion than the person. I support the project.
It's wishful thinking, but yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, okay. Paul?
I vote yes.
Dave?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes.
And I vote yes. That's a unanimous vote.
Thank you very
Very much, Mr. Litchfield. And thank you, Mr. Little.
And I think I might have left the property unaware of the one-way nature of the road when I left.
Oh. Maybe this time of year is not so important, but I'm sure it is at other times. What happened to my list? No, I'm going to find it. Okay, Sarah, next application, please.
Application number 21-088, Howard and Inga Walker, care of James M. Norcross Esquire, P.O. Box 707, Chatham, Mass. 02633. Owners of property located at 8 Windmill Lane, also shown on the Town of Chatham's Assessor's Map 16A, Block 22, Lot H9. The applicant seeks to enlarge, extend, or change a nonconforming dwelling on a nonconforming lot via the demolition of the existing sunroom and entry stairs, and the construction of a new sunroom, decks, and entry stairs. The existing dwelling is nonconforming, and that it is located entirely within the Coastal Conservancy District floodplain elevation 13, where a 50-foot setback is required. 5.2 feet from Little Beach Road, 24.1 feet from Windmill Lane, and 21.6 feet from the westerly abutter. The proposed sunroom and deck will be nonconforming, and that they will be located 23 feet from the westerly abutter where a 25-foot setback is required, and 32.8 feet from Windmill Lane where a 40-foot setback is required. The entry stairs to be rebuilt will remain nonconforming at 24.1 feet from the road where a 40-foot setback is required. The building coverage will remain 978 square feet, where 2,800 square feet is the maximum allowed. The lot is nonconforming in that it contains 9,584 square feet, where 40,000 square feet is required in the R40 zoning district. A special permit is required under Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 6, and Section 5B of the Chatham Protective Bylaw.
Good afternoon, Jamie Norcross representing Chip and Inga Walker, the owners of 8 Windmill Lane. Mr. and Mrs. Walker are both participating today remotely, as is Sean Henry from SV Design, who is the architect for the project. We were here, as I'm sure you remember, just over a month ago with a much more complicated application that day. As a result of the feedback from the board, the Walkers met with SV Design, came up with the modified proposal that we've submitted for today's hearing, which I would suggest is much more straightforward and much more simple. No variance requests, just a simple special permit. The project, and Sarah, if you wouldn't mind putting up the site plan, when you get a chance. So this is the current plan, which is reduced in scope quite a bit, the previous project. And so the plan consists of still the demolition and rebuild of the existing sunroom, which will remain in the same footprint. It proposes adding on to the top of that a roof deck. It still proposes a ground level deck that would come off of the sunroom. The size of that has been reduced by almost 45%, so it's much smaller than the previous deck that you saw last month. As a result of that, we now meet the setback to Windmill Terrace, so we're at the 40-foot setback, so therefore, most importantly from a zoning perspective, no variance is required anymore for this application. The reduced deck also results in it being located 23 feet from the westerly sideline, where the previous application we were about 19 feet. So again, we've pushed it over about 4 feet from that sideline as well. So we think it's addressing concerns, and we hope the board agrees in terms of a modified proposal that is certainly not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. So going into the criteria, adequacy of the size of the site, including but not limited to maximum lot or building coverage or setbacks. We believe the size of the site is adequate for the proposal. It's a small parcel and the existing structure is already non-conforming as to coverage and setbacks. The existing porch and sunroom is going to be rebuilt within the same footprint. The building coverage, I should have mentioned, will remain the same as currently exists and below what is allowed by the zoning bylaw. And many of the structures in this neighborhood are located well within zoning setbacks, and so the proposed deck at 23 feet from the westerly sideline and over 38 feet from Windmill Lane is in no way crowding the neighboring properties. Number two, compatibility of the size of the proposed structure with neighboring properties. This neighborhood is a mixture of homes with various styles and sizes. Proposed structure is modest in size and compatible with other structures in the neighborhood. Again, the building coverage remain unchanged, and the addition of the deck structure is a similar feature found with other homes in this neighborhood. Number three, extent of proposed increase in nonconforming nature of the structure or use. The entire proposal, including the front entry stairs, sunroom, and deck, will be located at or within the existing setbacks and does not increase the building coverage. Number four, suitability of the site, including but not limited to impact on neighboring properties or on the natural environment. We believe the site is suitable for this project. The project has been approved by the Conservation Commission, and the construction work can be completed without any negative impact on the neighboring properties. Number five, impact of scale, siding, and mass on neighborhood visual character. We don't believe there will be any negative impact on neighborhood visual character. The footprint of the rebuilt sunroom is remaining the same, and the proposed design is in keeping with the characteristics of the neighborhood. Additionally, by locating the new decks on the southerly side of the house, the walkers are limiting the visibility of those decks from Little Beach Road. Number six, compatibility of the proposed use with neighboring uses, single-family residence, and a residential neighborhood, and therefore it is compatible. Number seven, method of sewage disposal, source of water, and drainage. The property has a functioning Title V septic system, is connected to town water, and has appropriate drainage. Number eight, there will be no negative impact on traffic flow and safety. Number nine, there will be no impact or additional noise and litter caused by this project. Number 10, adequacy of utilities and all other public services. The property has all necessary utilities. Number 11, visual impact on the neighborhood and neighboring uses of any formula business, which is not applicable in this case, of course. And 12 relates to the additional criteria under the bylaw for dwellings located in the floodplain. The only lateral expansion of the structure is the new deck, as the proposed sunroom, as I mentioned, will be rebuilt in the existing footprint. We don't believe the deck expansion has a negative impact on the impervious area of the site, and as mentioned, the project's been approved by the Conservation Commission. So, Mr. Chairman, that'd be the extent of our presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone here or in Microsoft Teams that wishes to speak in favor of this application? If so, please indicate now so that Sarah can recognize you.
I see no one that wishes to speak in favor of this application.
And then I will read the correspondence. First, we have a note from Nicole Smith. No, it's from Crystal Keon. She writes on November 18th, this project has been issued an order of conditions. The hearing was closed on October 6th, 2021. Thank you. Then we have a memo. This is from Judith Giorgio, Board of Health, on 11/17. She writes, "I have no concerns regarding construction of a deck and sunroom as proposed at this property. The deck will not encroach on the existing septic system." Then we have a note. This is from Michelle Clark. She writes on November 12th, "The applicant was before the Historical Commission on August 17th, proposing to demolish the existing sunroom and to rebuild a new sunroom with a roof deck on the existing footprint. The Historical Commission determined that the structure located at 8 Windmill Lane is historically significant, but that the proposed modifications do not negatively affect the historic integrity of the structure. The commission accepted the plans as presented and did not impose a demolition delay on the project as proposed." And then we have a note. This is from Andrew Greenwald. He writes on November 4th. He says, "I understand there will be a new meeting to discuss the Walkers' revised proposal. Just wanted to confirm that we remain supportive and hope that they will be allowed to proceed as planned. We certainly have no objections." And they live at 9, he and his wife live at 9 Windmill Lane. And that's the extent of the correspondence. I would ask anyone in the audience or in Microsoft Teams who wishes to speak either against this application or has a specific question, please indicate on the screen so that Sarah can recognize you.
I see no one that wishes to speak in opposition or has a specific question.
And we'll have questions from the board. Megan?
I do not have any questions on this proposal.
Bob?
No questions.
Dave V?
I have no questions.
No
Randy?
questions?
Dave T?
No questions.
Okay. Paul?
And no questions. I'll move to close the hearing and move into deliberations.
Dave Veach seconds.
Need a vote? Buck?
Buck votes yes.
Paul?
All votes yes?
Dave T., yes.
Dave Veach votes yes.
I vote yes. So deliberations, Buck?
I don't have a problem with it, and I'll support it. I believe it meets all our criteria, and certainly it is certainly better than what we got now.
Dave Veach?
I agree, and I will support it.
Okay. Randy?
Meets the criteria. If I were voting, I'd support it.
So much better than the last deck and whatever. I'm definitely in favor of this.
Paul?
Yes, we're really familiar with this site, having had a hearing on it just recently in connection with both special permit and the variance, and this is clearly not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, so I'll support it.
Megan?
I agree with everybody else.
Okay. Do we need any conditions, Paul?
Well, it's obviously a very, it's a busy area, it's a short street off a busy area, and I wonder if there's any objection to our standard summer conditions.
No, the applicant's okay with those conditions.
All right, and I will move to approve the application with the following conditions: that all construction activity and vehicles will be contained on-site or at a neighboring property with the permission of the property owner, that between June 30th and Labor Day, there would be no exterior construction allowed, no work would be permitted on the weekends, and construction activity would be between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. only.
Dave Veach seconds.
Okay, we need a vote. Buck?
Buck votes yes.
Paul?
Paul votes yes.
Dave T?
Dave T. votes yes.
Dave E?
Dave Veach votes yes.
And I vote yes. That's a unanimous decision, Jamie. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Buck, please sign before you leave. Okay, everybody, we're back. And our last application today, Sarah, please.
Application number 20-081, Katama Point LLC, care of Joe Giacalone, 1 Presidential Way, Suite 109, Woburn, Mass. 01801, owner of property located at 68 Shell Drive, also shown on the Town of Chatham's Assessor's Map, 14K, Block 7, Lot W50. The applicant seeks to enlarge, extend, or change a nonconforming dwelling on a nonconforming lot via the relocation of a portion of the existing dwelling and conversion into guest quarters, and the construction of a new dwelling, garage, and pool cabana and swimming pool. Also proposed is the construction of a new driveway as allowed by special permit under Section 4A3D. The existing dwelling is non-conforming in that it is located entirely within the Coastal Conservancy District, floodplain at elevation 11. The proposed dwelling, guest quarters, garage, and pool cabana will be non-conforming in that they will be located within the Coastal Conservancy District where a 50-foot setback is required. The existing building coverage is 3,697 square feet, 43.7%, and the proposed building coverage is 6,055 square feet, 71.6%, where 15% is the maximum allowed. The lot is non-conforming in that it contains 8,455 square feet of contiguous buildable upland where 20,000 square feet is required. The lot contains 120,100 square feet in an R40 zoning district. A special permit is required under Mass General Law, Chapter 48, Sections 6 and 9, and Sections 5B and 8D2B of the Chatham Protective Bylaw. This was continued from December 17th, 2020, January 28th, March 11th, April 22nd, June 24th, August 12th,
August
and
12th.
October 28th, 2021.
Very good. We welcome you, Mr. and Mrs. Giacalone. We don't usually have a project of this nature presented by people with the same conviction and, let's say, stick-to-itiveness that the both of you have. So we welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Joe and Laurie Giacalone, owners of 68 Shell Drive. I apologize in advance as I'm not an attorney, so this may not be as smooth as some of the others.
That's okay. It's a nice break for us. Trust me. Trust me.
We felt it was important to represent ourselves so the board could get to know us a little better and just ask us any questions directly. Since we last met, we not only decided to represent ourselves, but in addition, we hired a new architect, Leah McGavern, and Leah is on remotely if you have any questions for her during the presentation. In addition, David Clark Engineering is on as well. We felt that we needed a completely new design after the last meeting, so we went back to the drawing board and at a great expense just to try to get this right. The house that we last presented, it was nice, but looking back, it wasn't very Cape Cod-like, maybe a little more Boston suburbia. Our new design, I feel, is much more fitting in what I would call a transitional farmhouse style. I watched the last ZBA meeting a few times to make sure that I noted the board's concerns. I hope we have done a good job to show that we truly listened to all the feedback. I did submit a spreadsheet breakdown of our past plans and how we've reduced the scope of this project in all aspects: driveway, bedroom count, conservation coverages. We have also gone back to the Planning and Conservation Board, and they have approved our new plan. The only change from the approved Planning Board driveway is the configuration has changed slightly. However, there is still no fill proposed, and the 258 square foot increase remains as approved by the Planning Board. Some highlights of our new plan. The driveway went from 7,700 square feet down to 3,749, which is basically the same as same that's there right now, plus 250 square feet. We have eliminated 500 feet of building coverage. East to west or left to right, if you're facing the structures, it's shorter in length compared to all the structures that are there right now. We are not bringing in any fill material, not taking material from one part of the yard and moving it to another, none of that. So no grade changes. We decided to make the historic structure a part of the program and not have it tucked away in the corner. That was one concern, or several of you may have mentioned at the last meeting, to make it part of the program, which we did. We eliminated a bedroom and any living area above the garage. We lowered the roof as much as possible. Last time, if you remember, we were right up against the roof height of 30 feet. We have 4 inches to spare now, so it's, you know, we do have a little margin of error, but we certainly plan to, you know, have that measured once framing is complete to make sure that we're spot on. Let's see. The pool is now a 3 to 4.5 foot deep, above grade plunge pool. So it's basically going to sit at deck height, and that's all that is. So those were all the major concerns I heard at the last meeting, and if you'd like, I could walk through the ZBA criteria responses. If you want
Please
me to,
do.
if you want me to read that?
Yeah.
Okay. I have exhibits that go along with these. I don't know if you want to show them as I go, but we can do that.
No, that would be really taxing, I think, on Sarah and not necessary.
Okay.
That's okay. So go ahead.
Okay. Adequacy of the size of the site, including but not limited to maximum lot building coverage and setbacks. The existing lot coverage is 3,697 feet, proposing an increase of 2,358 for a total of 6,055 feet of lot coverage. We respectfully ask the Zoning Board of Appeals for a special permit on this. Compatibility of the size of the proposed structure with the neighboring properties. The proposed structure is very similar in square footage to the 3 new residences constructed at the beginning of Shell Drive at Witter Road. Those homes are on much smaller parcels and have 2 floors of living plus larger basements. We will not have any basement for mechanical, laundry, storage. Also, they have pool sheds as well. Extent of proposed increase in nonconforming nature of the structure or use. The increase in nonconformity with building coverage is based on contiguous buildable upland due to the AE11 special flood hazard area. We respectfully ask the board to make an exception for this unique property. Property is almost 3 acres of land, and the proposed building coverage is only 5% of land area. Suitability of the site, impact on neighboring properties and the natural environment. The site is very large and extremely private as it sits down below the neighborhood. There are no close neighbors to impact. The property was developed approximately 300 years ago without buildable upland as now defined. There will be no impact to slopes or water runoff into neighboring properties, as we do not intend to regrade or fill the earth. A much larger proposal was analyzed by the Woods Hole Group and found to have no negative impact on flooding. The natural environment will be greatly improved at 68 Shell Drive, with significant removal of invasive plants and replanting with all native plants as approved by the Conservation Commission. The land restoration will include many thousands of square feet of land using native species with high wildlife habitat value. Impact of scale, siting, and mass on neighborhood visual character, including views, vistas, and streetscapes. There is no negative impact to views, vistas, and streetscapes, as the site cannot be seen for the most part. 68 Shell sits in a bowl way below and is hidden behind dense vegetation. The site is only partially visible to 58 Shell Drive, the green residence. 58 Shell Drive is 398 feet away from the new house and 280 feet from the proposed historic guest quarters, measured by Google Earth. 58 Shell Drive is at elevation 41, and our highest proposed ridge peaks are at elevation 37.9. They will continue to look over our roof and out into the bay. We have located the new home to be very much in the same location as the existing houses and barns, and have reduced the size east to west or left to right from 170 feet down to 152 feet, potentially opening up new views for the greens. Compatibility of the proposed use with neighboring uses. There is no change in proposed use. Adequacy of sewerage disposal, source of water, and drainage. The new house will be connected to town water, which is at our property line on Shell Drive. Sewerage will be connected to the existing leach field for the new house and a small two-bedroom septic system for the historic guest quarters. Impact on traffic flow and safety. There is no negative impact on traffic flow as there is no change of use. We will improve the safety of the traffic flow. Shell Drive is a dead-end road, and there are only 6 homes up the hill who currently have beach access on our property. We will be making a clearly marked path with shrubs that runs along the west side of the driveway, leading to the wooded path. This will keep cars away from those coming to and from the beach path. Noise and litter. Noise, no change from existing. And litter, we believe there will be improvements on litter. As the existing house is abandoned, we are not there to collect any beach litter, as well as siding and roof shingles that are blowing off due to deterioration. Adequacy of utilities. The utilities are adequate. We have a verbal agreement with a neighbor, Mr. Nouse, to allow a 10-foot utility easement to cross a small section of his property to access the electric pole and gas line on Kendrick Drive. We have been in contact with the utility companies, and they are prepared to do this upon permitting. Visual impact on neighborhood uses, not applicable. Number 11. Number 12, for those dwellings located in a floodplain, the extent of lateral expansion proposed and the extent to which lateral expansion impacts the impervious area of the site. The extent of the lateral expansion of the dwelling will not have a negative impact on the flooding characteristics of the property. The analysis prepared by the Woods Hole Group clearly indicated that the project, as originally proposed and much larger, had no negative impact on flooding. This revised project reduces the site coverage, and therefore it is presumed that this reduction would also have no impact on the flooding characteristics of the area. Similarly, the Woods Hole report concludes that the increase in impervious surfaces has no adverse impacts on the flood characteristics. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So I think it would be worthwhile if you could go through the design of the new house and how that fits your family and why you feel it is appropriate.
Sure. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So thank you for giving me time to speak, by the way. I know it's been a long process, and February will be 2 years since we got approval for the property. I mean, the accepted offer. When we were working with the architect, we had designed the house around what our needs were. So it has to accommodate Joe and myself, our 3 kids, but also Joe's mom, who's 81, and his 45-year-old disabled brother who lives with his mom, and a live-in nurse who he needs daily care. I'm sorry, I said I wasn't gonna cry.
That's
Do you
quite all
want me
right.
to just?
Yeah, can you?
No, so, I mean, basically, we need space and privacy. We also have 3 children of our own and everything that comes along with that. So, it won't be long before they're with us. As well as Laurie's parents, are still in good health, but, getting up there. And it's inevitable that we're gonna need some space. And we plan on living here full-time. This isn't just like a weekend house or, summer house. So, for that reason, we explain that we need something that gives you some elbow room or has enough sleeping arrangements. And I think, was there anything else? Was that, I do have Leah on. I think she's there. Maybe she could just give you a quick overview.
Great.
Leah McGavin?
Hi, yes, I am here. Yep, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. When I was asked to come and look at the design, or relook at the design, I took all my hints and clues about what I thought this should look and feel like from what was there. And I think what was there is absolutely lovely. It's an old house that has been added onto over time. So it's a series of attached and collective buildings. So I very much wanted this house to feel like it was not built all at once, and that it was added onto, and that it had a similar feel to it. So there's that, but there's also, this is a modern house. It's going to be energy efficient, so I didn't want it to be too traditional at the same time. So the main house, which is the main two-story building that you're looking at in the middle, that is actually, I started with the exact dimensions of the old house, and that's essentially what this is. It got a foot or two wider, I think. Otherwise, it's exactly the same dimension with exactly the same roof pitch. And that roof pitch of the old existing house is the same everywhere on all the main building blocks that you see here. So I very much wanted it to make the old house feel like it still belonged here, and like this house had a dialogue with the old house, and that it felt like it was built over a period of time. What you're not seeing here is that we've also started to work on the exterior cladding. So we've introduced some more natural materials, some more natural cedar, and some wood plank to, again, make it feel a little more rustic, may not be the right word, but a little more contextual, and to break up the volume a little bit, because I know it still is a fair amount of buildings, but I think the change in materials will make it look smaller. And also I want to add to that point that there's actually quite a lot of vegetation surrounding this house. I don't know how much if you've seen the landscape plan, but for example, there'll be some taller-ish trees on the left-hand side over by the guest wing to, so this diagram shows only the mitigation plan. It doesn't show the vegetation around the house, but there's a fair amount of vegetation immediately abutting the house, particularly on the left sleeping wing. So that will disappear more than what you see in just the elevations. Other than that, I think that if you have specific questions, I'm happy to address those. Otherwise, I think that gives a good summary of sort of how I came at this and how I think the design fits into the spot.
Thank you very much. Dave Clark, do you wish to add your 2 cents to the Jackaloni's directions to you?
No, I think I'm just here for questions.
Okay. Very
Regarding
good.
the site plan.
Very good. Thank you. So, I think we've come to a point where we'll move on. We'll move on to anyone in the audience, either here or on Microsoft Teams, who wishes to speak in favor of this application. Please indicate, or if you're here, please go to the, yes, thank you, sir. So we'll start with you, and if we see anybody else, we can add. Okay, good.
Mr. Green, we're going to have somebody that's in the meeting room speak first, and then you'll be next.
Hi, I'm Bob Nickerson. First off, I appreciate Joe's willingness to save the old house on the property. Obviously, William Nickerson, son of the original William Nickerson, built this property, and so it's a lot of importance to our family. I'm the president of the Nickerson Family Association currently. So I wanted to just say I thank you for letting me speak, but my comments, I support the property, but my comments also have a little bit of side issue that supports our organization with some blessing from Joe. My comments are specific to his original portion of the barn that he talks about trying to incorporate into the garage. And so, as someone who's restored an 1850s barn and made it into a house in 1999, and someone that's restored a 1796 house in 2018, which my family's owned since 1880, all in Howardsport, I'm very familiar with working with older structures and the difficulty and the challenge that comes into play with those. And so, Joe's willingness to move some of the parts of the barn into his garage is great, but it's a challenging thing to do because they're dimensionally different, the strengths are different, there's lots of things that can make it more complicated and more costly. So I am proposing a alternative and asking you to consider this when you vote on this. And that is, Joe is willing to donate the structure, the whole barn, to the Nickerson Family Association for our use on our campus in North Chatham on Orleans Road. NFA will flake the structure and store it while permitting and fundraising can be completed for restoration of the barn on our property. Plans for the structure include programs used during the summer months and other activities for the association. The NFA opens the Caleb Nickerson House, which you probably don't remember, was moved from Stage Harbor years ago, on Wednesdays, and anticipates the barn would be open at the same time also. This would enable the public to visit one of the oldest, if not the oldest barn in Chatham, 1700 about. It would also be appropriate for the structure to be sited on the NFA campus adjacent to the location of the first home of William Nickerson and Ann Busby, circa 1664. Frank Messina is initiating efforts to have the original site, now owned by the CCF, to be on the National Register of Historic Places. And of course, the NFA is supporting this effort. So in closing, my key thing is we're most interested in receiving the structure which would be available to the public at times. So ask the ZBA not to make using some of the barn material components a condition of approval, but at the same time, if that's a requirement for Joe to get his approval, we'll step back. But we really don't want you to make that part of the condition, so he has the opportunity to donate that to the NFA. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And I hope you support their project.
Thank you. Was there someone on the screen? Okay.
Mr. Green, if you'd like to speak, or Mr. Grimes and Mr. Green. So we'll do Dennis first, then Mr. Green.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. This is Dennis Grimes and Betsy Grimes, or Betsy Levings Grimes. We were the owners of the property for 50 years, almost 50 years. And Joe has been through a lot of work trying to get this thing approved. And the latest work that he's done is fantastic. And I like his new architect. She's doing a great job to blend old and new. And, you know, you're never going to have old Chatham as it was, but he's trying to integrate old and new. And the other thing I want to make sure that everybody understands is that we talk about that place as being in a flood zone. Yes, it is in a flood zone, but we built a berm some 30 years ago, and that place has never had a problem since we built that berm. So you kind of got to look at it as yes, it's in a flood zone, but it's not going to flood at all. So I just want to give 100% support to Joe in his efforts, and I think his architect has done a very good job of coming up with a new solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak in favor?
There is no one else that wishes to speak in favor of this application.
Okay, then I will read the correspondence. First, we have a note. It's from Frank Messina, who's the chairman of the Chatham Historical Commission. He writes on November 17th, myself personally and the Historical Commission have been involved since 2017 in the attempt to save the, quote, first period circa 1700 colonial house, end of quote, located at 68 Shell Drive, and there have been many attempts. There's no question among historical preservationists, Mass Historic Commission and others, including the Nickerson Family Association, that these structures at 68 Shell Drive are historically significant and should be saved. Although the revised application before you is not an quote-unquote historic restoration in the true sense of the term, we recognize that every historically significant property cannot become a quote-unquote museum, and current lifestyles require changes. I feel the applicant in this revised application has made a sincere attempt to save the significant parts of a first-period Nickerson homestead, not a complete historical preservation, but a reasonable, quote-unquote, adaptive reuse of architecture, design, and historical materials, which will preserve elements of the homestead in its original Wilman Nickerson Jr. family historical site. Then we have a note. This is from Judith Giorgio, Board of Health. She writes on 11/17, I've reviewed the plan to demo and rebuild and relocate portions of the dwelling. The plan will add 2 bedrooms to the property for a total of 8. This is allowed in accordance with the Board of Health nitrogen loading regulation, allowing for 1 bedroom per 10,000 square feet of lot area. A new septic system will be required as shown on the proposed site plan for the 2-bedroom guest house. The system must be elevated to comply with the BOH regulations per citing a septic system in a flood zone. The finish grade over the system must be more than 1 foot above the flood elevation for this area. And I believe that this is incorrect about a bedroom for a total of 8. I think it's 7, isn't that correct?
7.
7, yep.
Yeah, okay. Then we have a memo. This is from Nicole Smith, Conservation Agent. She writes on November 16th, 68 Shell Drive was approved by the Commission to draft an order of conditions which will be approved December 1st. The final plan revision date is 10/26/21. Then we have a letter. This is from Charles and Stephanie Bartlett, and their address is 241 Kendrick Road. They write on November 16th. As abutters to 68 Shell Drive, we feel an obligation to voice our concerns. We watched all the preceding hearings on this property and have been greatly relieved as your committee has not approved any of the several proposals presented by the Giacalone's architect. Other abutters and neighbors stated their opposition to 1, a gigantic home, now proposed at 71.6% building coverage, which would far exceed the percentage coverage allowed. That's 15%. And 2, construction and expansion located completely in a coastal conservancy district. We agree with these objections completely. In previous hearings, it has been stated that new construction will scarcely be visible by abutting properties. The current home is clearly visible from our home, so a larger house raised higher above the ground with increased number of bedrooms and bathrooms will most assuredly be prominent in our view. We will be interested to see what the Giacalone's new architect designs, but unless the new proposal is for a significantly smaller house consistent with similar nearby properties, we will be opposed. Our thanks to you and your committee members for your actions to make 68 Shell Drive consistent with Chatham norms. And that is the extent of the correspondence. So I would ask that if there's anyone here in the audience or in Microsoft Teams who wishes to speak either against this or has a specific question, to please indicate on the screen now or here in person if you wish to speak.
Mr. Green, this will be your opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. My name's Rich Green. I'm the owner of the abutting property directly behind 68 Shell Drive at 58 Shell Drive. I spoke in opposition to the proposal at the previous meeting, and I continue to oppose the modified proposal. I have 3 areas of concern that I would like to briefly address. First, the modified application continues to fall well short of the criteria/considerations listed to allow for a special permit under paragraph 5B, non-conforming lots, buildings, and uses. For example, the coverage has been modestly reduced. but it remains at 71.6% versus the existing coverage of 43.7% and is almost 5 times the 15% coverage that would be allowed there if there was no pre-existing non-conforming use. And while not included in the coverage calculations, there is an additional square footage of decks, patios, pool and cabana of approximately 3,000 square feet, which causes the proposed effective coverage to be more than twice the existing. Further, the 3,000 square foot footprint of the decks, patios, pool, and cabana is in itself larger than the footprint of any of the neighboring residential homes, including the 3 rather large homes that have recently been constructed. The existing residence is 3,300 square feet according to the Assessors Department. The coverage calculation shows the dwelling footprint at 4,000 square feet, the guest quarters footprint at 1,011 square feet, and the second-story residential component is easily more than 2,000 square feet, resulting in a total residential square footage of more than 7,000 square feet, much more than double the existing 3,300 square feet shown by the assessor's records. The proposed height of the primary dwelling is 8 feet higher, which is 40% higher than the 20-foot high existing dwelling. Also, a significant portion of the proposed dwelling is over the footprint of the 16-foot high existing barn and is 12 feet higher, which is 75% higher than the existing barn. In addition to the above, the proposal continues to fall short of the other criteria for a special permit listed in Section 5B of the bylaw, including neighborhood compatibility, extent of increase in non-conforming nature, site suitability, scale, site and massing, lateral expansion and traffic flow and safety as related to emergency vehicle access to a residence built into a bowl in the middle of the floodplain. Second, the proposal calls for the construction of a new single-family structure in addition to what the applicant calls a guest quarters. Section 4, which outlines the Conservancy District requirements, specifically prohibits the construction of new residential dwellings. As Mr. Upson correctly pointed out at the August hearing, while the primary dwelling may be allowed as a consequence of the non-conforming existing dwelling, a second dwelling is prohibited. And if the guest quarters is not a dwelling, what is it? Section 4 of the bylaw lists specific permitted uses, special permit uses, and prohibited uses. The guest quarters is not anything close to any of the permitted uses or the special permit uses. And the bylaw states that all activities except those needed to accomplish the above permitted uses shall be prohibited. As a consequence, the guest quarters clearly is prohibited, likely requiring a variance. And there are other components of the applicant's proposal that are highly questionable. Third, the proposal does not meet the height requirements established for the Conservancy District. As indicated by Jay Briggs in his 6/10/21 letter, Section 4.A.3.b states that no dwelling shall exceed 30 feet from the lowest adjacent grade. The drawing elevations have indicated the lowest adjacent grade, but they incorrectly calculated the maximum height by measuring from what they call landscape grade, resulting in a proposed ridge height that is 2 feet higher than allowed based on the guidance cited in Mr. Briggs' letter. Section 4.A.3.b also has a second limiting factor for height, stating that the maximum allowable height of the elevated structure may only exceed the existing height as measured from the top of the existing foundation by the minimum amount necessary to meet base flood elevation and freeboard requirements of the state. The ridge height of the existing dwelling is 29.8 feet and freeboard is 1.2 feet. Therefore, the maximum height allowed is 31 feet versus the proposed height of 37.9 feet. Also, as previously noted, most of the proposed dwelling is situated over the footprint of the existing barn, which has a ridge elevation of 26 feet, limiting the ridge height in that area to 27.2 feet, approximately 10 feet lower than proposed. The proposed dwelling is much too high and should be lowered substantially to meet the requirements of Section 4.A.3.B. Please let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for considering my input.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak either against this or has a specific question?
There is Dennis Grimes, but I'm not certain that he wants to speak in opposition.
Mr. Grimes, I think you already spoke in favor,
I spoke in favor, yes, I did, but
and that's fine.
Mr. Green,
No, no.
Mr. Green,
Excuse me, sir, but you had an
Yes.
opportunity, and this is not a debate between you and Mr. Green, okay? Thank you.
all right, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you. We have with us Jay Briggs, our building commissioner. If you could help us a little bit, Mr. Briggs, please. Perhaps you can straighten us and Mr. Green out, because I think his concerns regarding what's a guest house, what's a dwelling, and also the height of the house that you have thoroughly investigated, and if you could give us
I'm fairly familiar with this property. I've been dealing with it for a while.
longer than you've been here, yes.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes.
Going on 4 years now. So it's not a secondary dwelling. It is a guest house. It doesn't meet the definition of a dwelling. A second dwelling would not be permitted on the property. It doesn't have cooking. It doesn't have a kitchen as far as I recall. So that's not an issue. The building height was an issue at one point in time, but we measure building height now from lowest adjacent grade in the floodplain. It's much more accurate than taking a grade plane, which is an average grade. So we don't want to confuse that issue. The lowest adjacent grade will be the finished lowest adjacent grade, which allows for 2 feet of landscape material, which is not considered fill, just to dress up around the foundation during construction. So, I mean, I don't have the plans in front of me right now, but I haven't seen any issues where it doesn't meet the definition of building height.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Since you're up there, do any members of the board have any questions for Mr. Briggs? Randy?
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand by the presentation by the Giacalonis that they have a 26-foot height that they're shooting for, but then there's a 4-foot buffer, or are you really shooting for 30 feet for the?
I believe they're going to be under the 30-foot maximum height by 4/10 of a foot. I think that's where it stands right now.
Yeah, I think it was 4 inches.
It's 4 inches.
Inches?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. So that's a small amount, but is that
It's a small
enough? Is that
amount.
enough for a buffer zone?
Well, Mr. Giacalone said they'd check it during the framing process. I'm sure he will, just to make sure that there aren't issues at the end.
Are you pretty confident that they're not going to be coming back for a variance because it's going to go over?
I mean, I can't control the situation, but I would strongly encourage them to monitor the progress, because we don't want to get into a bad situation where a variance would be required.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question of Jay? Okay. Joe, did you want to speak to Mr. Green?
I just wanted to add to the height. I have no issue making that an order of the conditions to have that,
Yeah.
check that framing.
You'll never get a permit unless it is, so
Right.
I don't think we have to worry about that. I don't think we have to worry about that. So, okay, thank you, Mr. Briggs. Thank you very much. Okay. Questions from the board? Megan?
I have one question.
Sure.
If you donate the barn, the building, to the Nickerson Foundation, and pardon my vernacular if it's not quite right, but if you give it to them, does that change this plan at all, or we're still looking at the same plan, you'll just put new building materials in where they need to be?
Same exact, yeah.
Great.
I feel like I should have questions, but I don't. I mean, we've been at this for a while, and so I think in some respects, most of the questions that I've had have been answered
That's the
long ago.
eighth time out of the box.
Long ago. We've had a lot of practice at this, I guess you'd say. So, no, I unless something comes to me, I have no
Okay.
questions now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate that you've cut down quite a bit on the lateral expansion. And it's 71.6, and in my mind, I was kind of hoping for something in the 60s. And I don't know why, it just seemed more Chatham-esque. But in any event, why did you add the cabana when you did such a great job subtracting? Like, why did you have to go and add something?
I think perhaps Leah can, shed some light on that as far as, well, one of the things I could speak about right off the bat is the pool equipment must be elevated above the flood elevation. So unless we put the pool equipment right there on the deck, we plan on hiding it behind the cabana. So it's just gonna act as a restroom, an outdoor shower, and then a space to put lawn equipment, lawn furniture rather, at the end of the year.
But you already have a shed, right, besides that? And you already have 2 outdoor showers. Why do you need 2 outdoor showers?
We have one at the master suite, and this is just the main one for, the kids or whatnot at the pool. But there is no other shed. There's a
No?
there's a 2-car garage, but
Right.
that's,
No
if
other
we
shed.
park in the 2-car garage, we have 0 storage.
Did Leah want to chime in on the cabana?
I mean, I don't have much more to add to what Joe said, but I mean, there's 2 things going on. One, it's a practical concern. It's a place to store all the pool equipment and, all the stuff associated with pools. It's a changing room, it's a bathroom, it's a place for the kids to do all that without having to go inside the house. And the obvious thing is you have a pool and you have a nice house, it's really nice to have a cabana. It finishes the backyard. There's no denying it's just a nice thing, but it's pretty small, it's practical, and it really doesn't add a whole lot of square footage. I'm not getting the dimensions off my head, but it's about the size of a shed.
I think it's listed here as 300 square feet. Does that sound right? Okay. Any other questions, Randy? Dave Thompson.
Thank you very much. Dave Thompson has no questions.
Paul.
I do have some questions, so let me ask them and get that information one way or another here. Your presentation was very good. Thank you. Thank you for that, Joe. I did have some questions on what you presented. At one point, you mentioned that you would not have a basement in the house. What is the reason that there's no basement?
Because we have to be at above flood elevation 11, we have to have flood vents around the foundation per FEMA regulations. So when those flood vents have to be at grade level, and you cannot have the interior of the basement, if you will, below those flood vents. So water's supposed to be...
Joe,
I'm sorry?
Do you mind if I add a little bit to
Sure.
that? The idea is that should that place ever flood, with sea level rise or anything, is that there could be flooding with absolutely no damage to the environment or to the home or to the people, because the flood can just fill the space where the basement would have been but is not.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And there's no mechanical storage down below. There's nothing below. So there's going to be no oil tanks that would be flooded. There's going to be no electrical equipment down below the house that could cause damage or cause harm. So in other words, it can flood without doing any harm.
All right, thank you. And you also indicated that there would be no regrading or filling of earth on the property. Is that right?
None at all. There's just the landscape material that's allowed for planting, and that's it.
Okay. I guess I have some questions for Dave Clark, if he's still available.
I am here.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Dave, can you answer a general question for me first? Why is the building coverage standard in the ordinance based on buildable upland as opposed to the size of the property?
Why is it?
Yes.
Boy, you'd have to ask the folks that drafted that back in, I think, 1986. I think Jack Farrell was part of that committee. I don't know who else would still be around from that time. But I don't have an opinion as to what they were thinking at the time, if that's what you're asking.
Well, the one reason why I asked that is because one of the arguments that the applicant is making here is that we've got a lot that's 3 acres. I mean, we've got loads of property here. Why should we be concerned about building coverage?
Well, I would kind of agree with what Mr. Giacalone said. 3 acres of land is a good chunk of size of land, and if you're looking at the building coverage in relation to that, it's, in my opinion, kind of meets the massing of a house in relationship to the property. Because this particular property has a 1% chance of flooding, I don't know the reasons for the 1987 again, but to me, I think it's a case to be made.
All right, but you would agree that when we're looking at building coverage, we're looking at the building coverage versus the buildable upland?
That's what the bylaw says, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the way it's been presented, yes.
The Woods Hole report mentions that it's based on your October 30, 2020 plan, which we don't have. Can you?
It's markedly larger. 2020, it was a much bigger plan.
So I guess my question is, can you tell me what the changes are from that plan, which Woods Hole based its report on, to the current plan?
Sure. So basically, the Woods Hole report is based upon filling this property to, a majority of this property to elevation 11 plus, which would have meant over, I can't remember the number now, but it was over 3,000 yards of fill to be brought in. So their report basically was to analyze the criteria under our bylaw that, especially under conservation's regulations, that filling in the floodplain would displace floodwaters and increase flooding on neighbors' property. So the conclusion of that report was basically that all the fill that was proposed would have no impacts on the flooding characteristics on this property and abutting properties.
And, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So we did not ask Woods Hole to look at this again. We assumed that because we're not filling anymore, that that would basically result in the status quo as far as this flooding characteristics of the neighborhood, because the building will be built on a FEMA compliant foundation, which will allow floodwaters to come and go underneath the building.
Okay, so you will not be putting in any of that fill that was included in the October 30th plan?
None of it. Actually, we had, with the planning board, they were crystal clear in their comments and questioning to, in order to get an approval from them, that there was going to be no fill brought in other than what's allowed in the bylaw. Again, that's not considered fill, was for the foundation planting. So all the reworking actually, I wouldn't say reworking, but changing the surface from grass to gravel for the driveway is going to maintain the exact same grades that's there.
Wasn't part of the Woods Hole report beneficial because you were putting fill in?
Oh, yes. Yeah, so basically, we were taking the house out of the floodplain, and a majority of the abutters to the south, their close proximity to the floodplain would go away. So there was actually a benefit to the neighborhood by filling, in that we were taking not only our property out of harm's way, but possibly 2 or maybe 3 of the abutters.
Right. So when I looked at the Woods Hole report, I mean, one thing that sort of confused me about where we're at now is that it seemed as if Woods Hole was saying that you were going to be in better shape with the former, or the proposed plan than you would have been under existing conditions.
I would agree. When you elevate the land so it's above the floodplain, you make it impossible for floodwaters to come in. So from a flooding point of view, yes, filling the lot is better. And that was the whole point of getting Woods Hole involved, was our only, really, what I felt a year and a half ago was our only inroads to get that variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals, that there would be no impacts to the environment or neighbors. Obviously, that's not the way it went till first meeting, but that's understandable, so.
Well, as I looked at the Woods Hole report, and I look at what is figure 9 in their, on page 10 of their report, which is the maximum flood elevations from the 100-year storm under existing conditions, which is what we're now operating under, the entire site where this house would be located would be underwater.
Yes. That's the case right now, is the proposal that's in front of you. The house would not be underwater because we're elevating the first floor to 1 foot above the base flood elevation, which is a requirement from the building code, our bylaw, and FEMA. So the house itself, if you're looking at it vertically, would be out of the floodplain. So the only thing that would be touching floodwaters would be the foundation and also the garage slab, in that garages are allowed in the A zone under the building code.
Everything would just be surrounded by water, is what you're saying?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. When the planning board was looking at the question of dealing with elevation and flood zones, they had a series of hearings, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where they had public input as to what they should be considering in setting standards there. And they, in fact, made a presentation to our board back in 2016 about that. But they had a series of hearings, and they received a bunch of input, some of which was basically that you should not allow any increase in the footprint of the building that exists in the AE zone or the VE zone, and others of which said, no, you should allow some increase because it's necessary for people to get access to their property. For instance, they were saying, you know, what if people need stairs in order to get to the first floor because you've elevated? Or if you want to put a porch on the front. So they had this balancing act that they had to perform in coming up with standards for review of those issues.
They ended up, as I read the ordinance, saying that if you're in the velocity zone, you cannot go outside the footprint in terms of your building. But they ended up, if you were in the AE zone, which is what this property is in, saying that that would be too restrictive and there needed to be some flexibility. And as I understand it, the way they determined what the flexibility should be is by adding these criteria to the special permit provisions, which relate to floodplain approval by the ZBA. And those involve the question of whether there is an increase in the lateral expansion on the property, with the idea that that should be minimal, and that what effect that had on the impervious nature of the property. Can you tell me, is there lateral expansion or on this property?
Yes, there is.
How much is it?
I think Joe made that in his initial presentation. Let me just take a quick look at the plan.
I believe it's 2,358 for lot coverage increase. Oh,
Yeah, I'm looking at the wrong plan, sorry, hold on.
Sure.
That's
all right.
It's less.
It's less, it goes from 170 to 152.
right.
I don't think that's lateral expansion and what they're talking about.
What
Yeah.
is he talking about?
So lateral
That-
expansion include.
Oh, sorry.
The lateral expansion, Dave, would include the houses, the decks, the pools, all of that, not just the building coverage, and I don't believe that's calculated on your site plan.
Yeah, I wouldn't have considered the decks being lateral expansion. I would assume they were talking about the dwelling. So
Well, I
the
think-
numbers,
I'm sorry, but I think that the concept of lateral expansion is larger perhaps than the question of building coverage.
yeah.
But I take it that there is at least, as Mr. Giacalone has said, 2,358 square feet of additional coverage with this proposal. Does that sound about right in terms of building coverage?
Yeah, it's over 2,000 square feet. Let's see. It's probably 2,500 and, yeah, we're proposing 6,055 now, and the existing is 3,697.
Okay, so I think
So it's a-
that comes up to, I think, 2,358, according to Mr. Giacalone.
Okay.
And I don't dispute that. That's probably correct. In terms of building coverage, the question of increased of impervious spaces, is that larger than the question of building coverage because that concept is bigger?
I would say no in this case, because the decks are all elevated. So floodwaters can pass underneath the deck, and underneath the decks would remain pervious. As far as the building itself, obviously it'll be on a FEMA-compliant foundation to let the floodwaters come and go. So this being an A zone with standing water at, I think the still water elevation in this area is 9.5 or 10 or something, and we have as much as 3 feet of wave action. Obviously, all that wave action is going to be dissipated by the coastal bank and the berms that were constructed 30 years ago. So I don't think this structure has any impacts on the flooding characteristics of the property and the immediate and the adjacent properties, because the floodwaters have a place to go.
Right, well, I think that's what I was trying to figure out in terms of the standards that were given by the change in the bylaw back in 2016. The extent of the
And the-
lateral expansion proposed and the extent to which lateral expansion impacts the impervious area. But it looks as if there's at least 3,000 square feet that's involved here, 2,358.
Well, we're not, like I said, the area underneath the decks is not impervious. And the driveway is a pervious driveway. The notion that coastal floodplains absorb floodwaters is somewhat of a misnomer, in that that attribute is typically associated with inland waterways, where you have a rain event that needs to be passed through a land area, like a river or an inland floodplain. And so the more you fill a water course in an inland situation, you constrict the flow, and that water needs to go somewhere else because you're trying to pass a certain volume of water in a period of time. And so that's where you get the Mississippi is an excellent example. All the levees that they built over the years actually made flooding worse. But in a coastal situation, you have a coastal storm of a long duration, and the flooding occurs by a number of factors, mainly drop in pressure, and then you have the storm surge created by the wind activity that's basically the fetch associated with the storm center and the intensity of the winds. So no matter how much we fill, excuse me, or remove from this property, the floodwaters are still going to rise to the, to the still water elevation of 9 point something. And it's actually the depth of water seaward of the upper landform that dictates how high the waves are going to get. So obviously, if the still water elevation is elevation 10 and the landform is elevation 10, but the A zone is elevation 13, you can't get a 3-foot wave when the still water elevation is the same as the land elevation. So that at that point, the waves start breaking, and you have what's called wave run-up, and that is why the floodplain extends further inland. So I don't think these structures would impact any of that activity. In fact, the structures would probably be somewhat of a break to the waves, and that's why it's elevated. So I don't know if that made any sense. I'm not an expert on it, but that's the way I understand it, and it probably didn't come across very intelligently. So I apologize.
I'm sure it did come across intelligently, and you're obviously more of an expert on this than I am. But I'm just trying to comply to the extent I can with the requirements imposed by the ordinance and the discussions that were had with respect to these issues at the planning board before we adopted the additional standards with respect to the ordinance at town meeting in 2016. The comments that were made at the town meeting when these standards were adopted included some which were against adopting the standards at all because they felt they were not appropriate at that time or because they felt they were not necessary. But one of the comments that was made by a planning board member in support of the standards which we've just discussed that have been added to the special permits were from Bob Wursthauscher, who was on the planning board and who indicated that he had opposed the idea of any lateral expansion being allowed in the AE zone, but that he felt based on the need for making places livable that it was probably necessary. But one comment he made is that no one will let you expand to double the size of a dwelling in a flood zone. In fact, basically what we're being asked to do here is almost double the size of this dwelling. Does that, to you, seem to be consistent with the concept of what was adopted at town meeting?
Well, I don't think town meeting dealt with doubling the size of a house. I think that's just one person's opinion. It's certainly not based on engineering or environmental reasons. I think it's more to do with aesthetics and the social aspect of it. I think the building code deals with construction in the floodplain adequately. So I have no concerns about this house once the final structural engineering is done, will have any impacts on the floodplain, even during and after a 100-year storm event.
Okay, thank you. The only other question I had is with respect to the historic house, and I think maybe Mr. Giacalone could answer this question. When we looked at the plans for the historic house, when they were submitted by Smook, I guess is the name of the architectures, there was a section of the house which was attached to it, which was part of the historic house, which was in the original proposals that you had made, but does not seem to be on this one. Is that correct?
That's correct. We got rid of that back area.
And what was the reason that you got rid of that back area?
Just to help reduce building coverage.
Okay. And I'm curious as to whether you're able to maintain the fireplace and the chimney in the original house.
Right, that's in the center of the house. So right now, all plans are to move the house as is. And all three house movers have warned against trying to move the chimney, and I actually had a mason there this afternoon looking at it, saying he doesn't think it's gonna make it. The chimney above the roof is not historic, and there's no footing underneath. But we're gonna give it a shot.
Well, it sounds like a difficult task, but you should be commended for trying to preserve a historic structure, and that certainly is one of the great pluses to what's being proposed. I don't think I have any further questions.
Sarah has some questions from our member Bill, who could not attend but has sent them in.
First, he'd like to commend you on the effort to limit or nearly eliminate the regrading on site. Please confirm that the berms previously proposed to be constructed or reconstructed have been deleted, and what was the justification for doing this?
I think that's probably a David question. I believe there was a berm on the eastern side that we're not doing anything with, correct, David?
That's correct. I think after the last meeting, it was clear that Jay Briggs did not consider it restoration or dune enhancement, which is allowed in the bylaw. I think he felt that that area was completely all upland, and so we did not qualify for that exemption that's in the bylaw. So rather than seeking a variance for that, we removed it from the plan.
And his final question is, as to the path, I don't see it on the site plan and it should be there. Also, the applicant mentioned beach access for 6 homes. Is this an existing easement to the benefit of those homeowners?
This is an easement, correct. Currently, they walk down the driveway. I believe I have a photo. Let me see. Was Exhibit 9. So you could see, that's the easement path right there, the cursor is.
Joe, you'll have to stand back at the mic, they can't hear you over there.
Yeah, right where your cursor is, that's the easement path that runs right along the western side of the property. And that dumps out right now, right at the driveway. Yeah, it actually begins there, but in actuality, it dumps out right at the corner. So part of my criteria of traffic flow and safety was to mention that I was going to have a clear path right there. So anyone, if there's kids coming back and forth from the beach, they're not running right out into the driveway.
That was the question. Okay. Any other questions that have come up?
You skipped me.
No.
And it's not the first time, all right, let it go.
Didn't you ask a question?
Yeah, like way long time ago in the question section.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah, seriously,
We're still in.
Oh, my God.
Apology accepted.
Yeah, I do apologize.
That's okay.
Sincerely.
It seems like yesterday, I know. I don't.
Dave, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just one thing did come up, so I'll just double check probably with Dave Clark, but since there was some mention from a few of the neighbors about height and all, I did a little math on the site plan here. And it appears to me, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, that the highest part of the new ridge is 8.1 feet higher than the existing ridge. That's what I get from what the site plan shows. And then, go ahead, sorry.
No, just give me a second to confirm that.
It's 37.9 to 29.8.
Yeah, 8.1.
Yeah, and then I went and looked at tops of foundations because the law requires that you're gonna have to raise that up. And I see a 2.5-foot difference from the existing top of foundation to the 11.2 feet top of foundation to meet the requirements of the flood regulations. So that, to me, shows a 2.5-foot difference. So that's, of that 8.1 feet, 2.5 feet is mandated by the codes. So just to point out, I want to point this out because personally, I don't think, that's a 5.6 feet higher that's not mandated by law, which I think is admirable. Yeah, to comment. So other than that, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So, Paul.
I'll move to close the hearing and move into deliberations.
Dave Veach seconds.
Okay, we need a vote on that. Paul?
Vote yes.
Dave?
Yes, Dave Thompson, yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Dave Veach votes
Dave?
yes.
And I vote yes. Okay. Deliberations. Dave Veach.
Wow. Well, overall, I think, I indicated the last time that the last proposed house, that I felt, I thought maybe I was stretching a little bit, but I felt that it was not going to impact the visual characteristics of the neighborhood or anything, and that I could have supported that. When I saw this plan and when I saw this plan and when I see these drawings, I have to say, I think that this process, it has been, there are a lot of back and forth, but I think this process has led us to a much better result. I think when I look at, and again, looking at this in comparison to what's there now, and what's on the ground, the buildings that are there now, and this proposal on that site, to me, I think this is as good as we could ask for. I really, so we're saving the old house, and as indicated in some of the notes, that it's an adaptive reuse, and I actually think it looks great, honestly. I mean, the entire proposal here, to me, visually just speaks much better to me than the previous ones. And when I think about, when I try to project this on that site and what the views of it are, even from the closest neighbors, in no way do I see that this is substantially more detrimental. I think this is a tremendous improvement in many, many respects. And I think that, if this were a smaller lot, and we do have, I think it's important here on the slide, particularly with the elevation of it and everything, that we do think about the size of the lot in comparison to it's not only upland, it's contiguous upland that is the bylaw requires us to look at. The proposal to keep the driveway and not try to fill, et cetera, and keeping everything, to me, this looks like a very thoughtful, sensitive response to the concerns that we have shown all along. And I'll support it. I think that, again, as I said, that height, it's not significantly higher than what's there now. Really, it's blocked. It sits pretty much in the same area. I drive down the driveway. I project what it's going to look like. It's not going to have any negative impact on neighborhood views and vistas. Given some of what took place up the hill from there recently, this is so much better an example of what I feel we should see or be encouraging to take place. I can't even say enough about that. I think that it's going to meet the requirements of the floodplain regulations. Paul, we really are not given we are given that condition about the extent of lateral expansion and how that may impact, but I don't see where we have any guidance other than that. And I thanks, Paul, for trying to help kind of explore some of that, to me, this seems, it's a fit. And I think that the old house gets saved, which we've been encouraged to do, and to be commended for doing that. It's definitely more house than there, but it's attractive. It doesn't stand out. It's not going to stand out from anywhere, really. So I think I wouldn't call it a modest proposal, but I think ultimately, visually, it's going to be very modest when time's all said and done. So certainly not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. I think it meets all of our criteria. It doesn't impact neighborhood views and vistas in a negative way in any respect as far as my judgment of that goes. I just think that this is one that I can absolutely support. I'm going for it.
Randy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I definitely found it helpful for you to explain why you need this for your family. And, it's understandable. You have a big family of 3 children, which nowadays is kind of a lot of kids. And they all want their own bedrooms, and someday perhaps they'll have children of their own. And I understand why you want it so big, so that was helpful. I also like the fact that you're gonna have that path on the side for the people that are gonna go down. And I like the fact that you've made the pool smaller. I don't like the cabana, I already told you that. And I would have been happier if it was in the 60s. But on balance, especially given the lateness of the hour and all the effort that you've put in, I would support it.
Dave Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. I'm very impressed with what I've seen comparing to what we've seen in the past. It's Cape Cod architecture. It belongs in that spot. That house belongs in that spot, the old house, and you're saving it. There are other houses in Chatham that are about the same age, not quite as. I can think of one on Old Harbor Road. You should be commended on what you've done. I know it's been a long journey, a terrible journey, and I'm sorry for that. I'm voting in favor by 102%.
Thank you.
Paul?
Well, this has definitely been a process which has improved the project in terms of our zoning ordinance and in terms of its overall impact in the area. I think the biggest problem has been that we're dealing with a site which is very difficult to deal with. It's in a conservation zone, a flood zone. It's subject to all kinds of restrictions. There's some history to this in the sense that these kinds of zones are not zones in which we encourage building or expansion. And in fact, you could not expand in the AE zone with respect to elevating prior to the town meeting in 2016. And that's why the standards which they put onto our special permit areas were of significance to the planning board, at least at that time, because there were a lot of people who felt there shouldn't be any expansion, just as there had never been expansion, and that concept was continued in the VE zone. That's why I spent a lot of time looking at the question of where did these standards come from and why are they there? And, when you're down to the idea of arguing over whether you should have outside stairs to elevate to a house or whether you should have a front porch because it expands and so forth, well, you compare that to the expansion that we're looking at here and you think, oh my God, this is huge. And it's in a zone that's theoretically not a zone that you're supposed to be building in. So that caused me to spend a lot of time researching these issues, and it still causes me a lot of concern. I think, as Dave Veach said, this is perhaps as good a proposal as we could have given this site. But that's the question. Is the site, in fact, where we should be doing this kind of expansion? These are certainly attractive people, an attractive family, and they would be a great plus for Chatham. So those are the issues that I have been balancing in my own mind as to how to go forward with them. I just think that, as I have said from the beginning, that this is too big a house for the location where it's being located, given the site that you're working with. And part of the problem is that we didn't really get the kind of guidance that we perhaps needed from the change in the ordinance. They wanted to leave it to our discretion, given that we deal with these issues all the time. And that's what we did. And I think at the time of the town meeting, Peter Farber said, this doesn't really give any direction at all to the zoning board. And these standards shouldn't be adopted on that basis. But as it turned out, they were adopted anyhow. My feeling is that it's kind of ironic that we end up with a house which is being built, which is much larger than what was in existence before, and it becomes the dwelling unit for the property, and the original dwelling unit, which is 200 years old or 300 years old, is no longer considered to be a dwelling unit because it does not have a cooking facility inside. But what it does have is the same fireplace that was in it for 100 years and was used as the cooking facility. So you get wrapped around this ordinance and you begin to think, what the heck is going on here? And I think when I looked at the overall, what the heck is going on here, there were a lot of pluses, but there was a significant negative. And the negative to me was, this is just not the right location. And they deserve to have a nice house, but I think given the site and given the expansion that's involved in what was the original footprint, I cannot approve it. So I will be voting negative.
Megan?
Okay, so with regard to the coverage, initially, I was quite shocked with the 71%. Lucky for you, I've been staying in a rental in that neighborhood because I'm doing my kitchen. And as it turns out, it is a much, much larger lot when you run it and walk it on a daily basis than it seemed when I drove down the driveway. Yes, I've been creeping on your lot, sorry. So I actually changed my opinion, and with regard to our discretion with lateral expansion, having listened to that, given the lack of guidance, or what I perceive to be the lack of guidance from the 2016 edition, it seems to me that that you're actually reducing it in my mind, in my understanding of it, because you're going from, and I understand that the overall coverage is significantly increasing, but the lateral expansion is going from 170 to 152. It's not really expanding massively, aside from those extraneous things, pools, decks, et cetera, which I'm not convinced we're supposed to take into consideration. So I could be wrong, but that's sort of how I'm viewing it. I have a huge respect for you saving the house. I am inclined personally to not want to put any restrictions on you keeping it on the property, because I think if the Nickerson family would like that as part of their compound, that would be fantastic, especially given that it would be open to the public. I have a tendency to be, I have an affinity for old homes. I grew up in a house built in 1680. So for me, saving that in any way that you can is very important, so thank you for that. I personally think the cabana is great. I have, however, a newly minted teenager, and I really appreciate any extra space they have that's not traipsing through my house soaking wet. So I understand why you want that there. I don't even have a pool, and it happens. I don't even know how. I love the new project. I think it's great. I think you've done an enormous favor to yourselves by speaking on your own behalf. I think it makes a huge difference to understand the people who are behind the house and not just sort of see it through an attorney, though don't tell the attorneys, I'm sure they're listening, that I said that. But it makes a big difference to understand why you're looking for what you're looking for. So I, unfortunately for you, I'm not voting, but I would wholeheartedly support it. It's a large, large lot, and I understand that that is not the buildable piece of the lot with regard to the bylaw. However, when you're looking at it from the neighbor's perspective, and you're looking at it as it fits into the community and as it fits into the neighborhood, I think you have to take into consideration that it's a massive lot. So that's where I stand, and I really think that you did a great job.
Thank you.
Well, I think Megan hit one of the most important things. I mean, 3 acres, that's a lot. And to only occupy 5% of it, that's pretty small. And even though we get wrapped up with buildable upland and all these other subjects, if you're worried about what the visual of something is, you're not worried about that. It's what you see, you know? Buildable upland, who cares, really? I mean, it just doesn't ring a bell. One of the difficulties of this particular house is the fact you can't have a basement. For instance, the mechanicals have to go on the first floor. Where are you going to store your lawn furniture, the stuff for the pool and all that? Well, part of it's going to go in the house. Maybe part of it can go into the 2-car garage. I'm not too sure, but yeah. I mean, so, it's sort of unfair to me to compare it to, say, my house, because I have a big basement, and I've got boilers and air handlers, and you name it there. And they have to live with this on the first floor. They've knocked themselves out to do everything we asked them to do. There's no fill. There's no 10-wheeler dump trucks rolling up and down Widow. They're not carving X out and moving it around. The driveway, they're going to keep it the way it is, and that's great. I mean, 200 square feet, okay, fine, but, it's very attractive. I think this architect, I didn't think the other one was particularly attractive, but I sure think this one is. The fact that the house is going to be saved is a real plus. I mean, wherever it is, it's being saved. And the fact they can use it is something too. It's not just going to be in a corner collecting dust. Is this substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood? Absolutely not. It's going to be a showpiece. Even though you can't see it, but when you walk down, you can see it, and you drive down and see it. It's going to be spectacular. And it's certainly a plus that they plan to make it their home. That's a real plus, so you know it's going to be used. It's going to be loved. I congratulate you both.
Thank you very much.
It's really, really super. And there's nothing else to say. I don't think we need to worry about conditions at all. Yes.
No, and actually, I wanted to say, which I forgot to say, I am not interested in trying to impose any kinds of conditions with respect to reuse of any part of the barn or about the saving of the house. That's from a zoning perspective, those are not our, I mean, we have concerns, but those are not our concerns. So, I mean, if in the process of this, they get the old house up and the chimney collapses and the Nickerson family says, we'll take it and we'll take it off your hands, and they say, so then I don't want us putting conditions on that would prevent that kind of thing.
No, and you're right about the garage too. I mean, that was brought up. That's really up to Mr. and Mrs. Giacalone.
Absolutely.
That's not our world,
And then, Dave, just to reiterate, because there was so much discussion about the height and making sure that the 4 inches and they don't exceed. So I would just take to heart, because we very recently had a situation like this, and there were some mistakes were made, things, and just from a kind of a nuts and bolts perspective, Joe, you and your architect, and what you want to make sure on those 2 sections of the house that are at the highest point of the ridge, before they cut those rafters, they want to measure the height to to the top of those plates that the rafters spring from, so that if there's something that needs to be adjusted, they can adjust it in the pitch of the rafters. Because
Sure.
otherwise, if you shoot the thing after the rafters are all up and it's too high, you got to take all of those things off and start over. So just keep that in mind. Some advice.
I dare say that, yeah, I dare say Mr. and Mrs. Giacalone be watching them like a hawk.
Yeah, there's no chance of that happening.
Two hawks. Right, yeah. Okay, time to vote. Paul?
I'll move to approve the application as submitted. I don't think we need any conditions.
No, no.
Dave Veach seconds.
Okay, this is a voice vote. Paul?
I'll vote no.
I vote yes.
I vote yes.
I vote yes.
I vote yes.
So you are successful, 4-1.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I also want to thank Mr. Messina and Mr. Briggs, who have, you know, for their time.
And Mrs. Clark,
Yeah.
who's put in, we figured out 56 hours on this project.
I apologize.
Oh, close to it. No. It's okay. And as Mr. Thompson said, we're sorry for the long journey, but at the end of the day, it was worth it, and you still have the cabana.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
No, the cabana for me is gonna be like the cupola for you.
Yeah. Yeah, not yet. We haven't taken a vote. Any other business, everybody? Okay, we need a vote to adjourn. Megan?
I'll move to adjourn.
Well,
Second.
Megan?
Yes.
Paul?
All votes yes.
Dave?
Dave Thompson, yes.
Randy votes yes.
Veach votes yes.
And I vote yes. Thank you, one and all. We're done.
We are officially.